Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. People keep asking me why I didn't say something sooner. Why I didn't tell anyone about the guy who kept coming in during my closing shifts at Brewster's Coffee House. The truth is, I did tell someone. I told my manager, Diane, and she brushed it off like I was being paranoid. It's a coffee shop, sweetie. People come in for coffee. But this wasn't about coffee. Anyone who's worked late-night service in a small town knows the difference between a regular customer and someone who's watching you. My 23rd birthday had just passed in September, and I'd been pulling these Thursday and Saturday closing shifts for about 6 months. The money was decent for coastal Maine, and I needed it to save up for a place of my own. Living with 3 roommates in a drafty house off Route 1 wasn't exactly the dream, but it beat moving back in with my parents in Augusta. Brewster's sat on the corner of Harbor Street and Pine, one of those brick buildings that looked charming during tourist season, and absolutely desolate once October hit. By Halloween, most of the summer people had cleared out, and the town felt like it had shrunk to half its size. The first time he came in was mid-September, maybe 2 weeks after my birthday. It was a Thursday night around 9:45 p.m., 15 minutes before closing. We didn't get many people that late on weeknights, maybe 1 or 2 stragglers grabbing a coffee for the road. He walked in wearing a dark green jacket, the kind with too many pockets, and a baseball cap pulled low. Nothing unusual about that. Plenty of guys dressed like that around here, especially the ones who worked on the fishing boats or in construction. What struck me was how he didn't look at the menu board, didn't look at anything except me. He ordered a black coffee, paid in exact change, and sat at the corner table near the window. That table had a direct view of the counter where I worked. I went about my closing routine, wiping down the espresso machine, restocking the pastry case for morning, counting the register. The whole time I could feel him staring. Not glancing. Staring. When I finally looked up, he'd turn his head just slightly like he'd been caught, but not enough to seem embarrassed. Just enough to let me know he knew I'd noticed. He stayed until 10:03 p.m. I'd already locked the front door at closing time, and he'd watched me do it. Then he stood up, walked to the door, waited for me to unlock it, and left without saying a word. Didn't even throw away his cup. The second time was that Saturday. Same routine. Came in at 9:47 p.m., ordered black coffee, exact change, corner table. Same stare. This time I tried making conversation, thinking maybe I was reading too much into it. "Cold out there tonight, huh?" He nodded. Didn't smile, didn't respond, just nodded and kept his eyes on me. I felt this knot forming in my chest, the kind you get when you're in a situation that isn't dangerous yet, but could become dangerous if you make the wrong move. I texted my roommate Jenna around 9:55 p.m. "Creepy guy here again." She wrote back, "Want me to come get you?" I almost said yes. But then I thought about how ridiculous it would sound if I had to explain it to Diane the next day. A guy came in for coffee and sat quietly. That's it. That's the whole story. So I texted back, "No, I'm good. Just venting." He left at 10:05 p.m. that night. I watched through the window as he walked down Harbor Street toward the marina, hands in his pockets, not in any hurry. The streetlights made his shadow stretch out long and thin behind him. It became a pattern. Every Thursday and Saturday for the next month, he'd show up between 9:45 and 9:50 p.m. Always the same order, always the same table, always staring. I started timing my closing tasks differently, staying behind the counter as much as possible, keeping the espresso machine between us like some kind of barrier. I memorized his features during those weeks, the way his eyebrows were darker than his hair, which was a sandy brown that looked greasy under the fluorescent lights. He had this small scar above his left eye, shaped like a fishhook. His hands were rough, calloused, with dirt permanently wedged under his fingernails. He never wore a wedding ring, Never carried a phone that I could see. On October 10th, I finally told Diane about him. We were doing inventory in the back room and I tried to keep my voice casual. "There's this guy who keeps coming in right before close. It's kind of weird." She barely looked up from her clipboard. "Is he bothering you? Like saying anything inappropriate?" I hesitated. "No, but he just sits there and watches me." Diane sighed in that way managers do when they think you're wasting their time. "Honey, we're a public business. As long as he's not harassing you or breaking any rules, there's nothing I can do. Maybe he just likes the coffee." I didn't bring it up again. The Thursday before Halloween, something changed. He came in at his usual time, but instead of going straight to the corner table, he walked up to the counter and stood there. Just stood. I was refilling the sugar dispensers and nearly dropped one when I realized he was right in front of me. "Can I help you?" My voice came out shakier than I wanted. He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering the question. Then he said, "You work alone a lot." Not a question, a statement. My heart started hammering in my chest, but I forced myself to smile. That fake customer service smile I'd perfected over months of dealing with difficult people. "Sometimes. Can I get you anything else tonight?" He didn't answer right away. Just kept looking at me with these pale blue eyes that didn't blink nearly enough. Finally, he said, "Black coffee," even though he'd already ordered and paid. I told him he'd already gotten his coffee, pointed to the cup in his hand. He looked down at it like he'd forgotten it was there, then walked to his usual table without another word. I immediately pulled out my phone and started typing a text to Jenna. He just said something really creepy, but I deleted it. What would I even say after that? He made an observation, he noted that I work alone. Diane was right, he hadn't technically done anything wrong. That Saturday, October 26th, he didn't show up. For the first time in over a month, I closed the shop without him sitting in that corner, watching. I should have been relieved. Instead, I kept glancing at the door, expecting him to walk in any second. The anxiety of anticipating him was somehow worse than having him actually there. I texted Jenna, "Creepy coffee guy didn't come in tonight." She responded with a party emoji and maybe he finally got the hint. But I couldn't shake this feeling in my gut that his absence meant something. When I locked up at 10:15 p.m. and walked to my car in the back lot, I found myself practically running. Every shadow looked like it could be him. Every sound made me whip my head around. I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes before starting the engine, checking the back seat 3 times, making sure all the doors were locked. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced I'd see that green jacket somewhere behind me. When I finally got to the house, Jenna was still up, watching some reality show in the living room. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed it off, told her I was just tired. But that night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the way he'd said, "You work alone a lot," and wondering what he'd meant by it. Halloween fell on a Thursday that year. I'd been dreading it all week. Thursday meant closing shift, and some part of me knew he'd be back. Diane had asked if I wanted to switch shifts with someone since it was Halloween, but I said no. I don't even know why. Maybe I didn't want to seem scared. Maybe I thought if I acted normal, everything would be normal. The shop was busier than usual during the day. Parents bringing kids in for hot chocolate. Teenagers grabbing pumpkin spice lattes before heading out to parties. By 8 p.m. though, it had cleared out completely. The string of orange lights Diane had hung in the window looked more eerie than festive once the sun went down. I spent the next hour and a half in this state of heightened awareness, every time the door chimed making me jump. At 9:30 p.m. I started my closing routine early. Wiped down the tables, emptied the trash, began breaking down the espresso machine. At 9:47 p.m. the door chimed. I looked up, and there he was. Same green jacket, same baseball cap. But this time, he was smiling. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind that makes you realize the person wearing it knows something you don't. He ordered his black coffee. Paid in exact change. walked to the corner table. I tried to focus on closing tasks, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling as I counted the register. I miscounted twice, had to start over. At 9:55 p.m., my phone buzzed. Text from Jenna. "Happy Halloween, we're ordering pizza, want us to save you some?" I started typing back, "Yes, please." But then I looked up and he was staring directly at me. Not just looking, staring with this intensity that made my thumb hover uselessly over the screen. I set the phone down on the counter and went to the back room, pretending I needed to grab something. I stayed there for maybe 2 minutes, trying to calm down, telling myself I was overreacting. When I came back out, he was standing at the counter, not sitting at his table, standing right there, inches from where I'd left my phone. "We're closed," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He glanced at the clock on the wall. "It's only 9:57. He was right. I'd locked the door at 10 p.m. every other night he'd been there. "I'm closing early tonight," I lied. "Halloween and all." He nodded slowly, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he said, "You dropped something." He pointed to the floor behind the counter. My phone. It was on the floor, screen side down. I know I'd left it on the counter. I bent down to pick it up, and that's when I saw his shoes, work boots, scuffed and stained, positioned right at the edge of the counter on the employee side. He'd come behind the counter. While I was in the back room, he'd walked around and stood where only staff were supposed to be. The realization hit me like ice water. I straightened up fast, phone clutched in my hand, and took several steps back toward the espresso machine. "You need to leave," I said, and this time my voice definitely shook. "Now." He held up both hands in this mock surrender gesture, that same disturbing smile still on his face. "Just trying to help." He walked back around the counter, slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact the entire time. When he reached the door, he stopped and turned back. "Same time next week?" My throat had gone completely dry. I managed to nod even though every instinct was screaming at me to say no, to tell him never to come back. But I was terrified of what he might do if I antagonized him. He left, and I immediately locked the door behind him, flipping the deadbolt with shaking fingers. I watched through the window as he walked toward the parking lot, but instead of leaving, he just stood there under the streetlight, facing the shop, watching me watch him. I grabbed my phone and opened my messages. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely type. I started writing to Jenna. "He's here again." But then I stopped. "He's here again." Those 3 words looked wrong on the screen, inadequate for what I was feeling. I deleted them and tried again. "That guy from the coffee shop came behind the counter tonight. He moved my phone. I think he..." But I didn't know how to finish that sentence. "I think he what? I think he's dangerous? I think he's planning something?" I had no proof, just this overwhelming sense of dread that had been building for weeks. I stood there with my phone in my hand, cursor blinking, trying to find the right words. Through the window, I could still see him standing in the parking lot. He hadn't moved, wasn't even pretending to walk to a car. Just standing there, hands in his pockets, staring at the shop, at me. I made a decision. I deleted what I'd written and typed something new. "He's here again." Short, simple. Something Jenna would understand meant I needed help. But before I could hit send, the lights went out. Not just in the shop, the street lights too. The whole block had gone dark. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in the sudden silence. The only light came from my phone screen, casting this pale glow on my face. And in that glow, I could see through the window that he was gone. The spot where he'd been standing was empty. My first instinct was to call 911, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. They hovered over the numbers while my brain raced through possibilities. Power outage, completely normal for coastal Maine in late October. Wind knocks down a transformer, whole neighborhoods go dark. Happens all the time. But the timing felt too perfect, too deliberate. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept it across the shop. Everything looked normal. Empty tables. Clean counters. The Halloween decorations casting strange shadows on the walls. Then I heard it. A soft knock on the back door. 3 taps, evenly spaced. My whole body went rigid. The back door led to the alley where we took out trash, where delivery trucks dropped off supplies. There was no reason for anyone to be back there at 10 p.m. on Halloween night. No reason except one. The knock came again. 3 taps. Patient. Like whoever was out there had all the time in the world and knew I was listening. I should have called the police right then. Should have hit those 3 numbers and waited for help. But instead, I found myself walking toward the back of the shop, phone flashlight leading the way. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some part of me needed to confirm what I already knew. Maybe I thought if I could just see him, identify him properly, I'd have something concrete to report. I reached the back door and stood there, hand on the deadbolt. The metal felt cold under my palm. I could hear breathing on the other side, slow, steady breaths that matched the rhythm of those knocks. Then a voice, muffled through the door, but unmistakable. "I know you're there." It was him. Had to be. But the voice sounded different than it had inside the shop. Less controlled. More excited. "Open the door," he said. "We need to talk." Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get out the front and sprint to my car. But my car was in the back lot. To get to it, I'd have to go outside eventually, and he'd be waiting. The front door led to Harbor Street, which would be mostly empty this time of night. I'd be running in the dark with no idea where he was or if he had a car. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. Text from Jenna. "You on your way home?" The screen light illuminated my face, and I realized with growing horror that it probably illuminated the gap under the door too. He could see the light. He knew exactly where I was standing. "I just want to talk," he said again. And this time I heard something else in his voice. Impatience. The doorknob started to turn. Slowly at first. Testing. The deadbolt held, but watching that knob rotate made something inside me snap into action. I backed away from the door, typing as fast as I could. "He's here again, back door, call police now." I hit send and immediately dialed 911. My hands were finally working again, adrenaline overriding the fear. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I whispered everything. The man, the weeks of watching, the power outage, the back door. She told me to stay on the line, that officers were 3 minutes away. 3 minutes felt like a lifetime. The doorknob had stopped turning, but I could still hear him out there moving around. Footsteps in the gravel. Then silence. The worst kind of silence, where you don't know if the danger has passed or if it's just repositioning. I moved to the front of the shop, keeping my back to the wall, phone pressed to my ear. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking me questions to keep me calm, but I barely heard her. I was focused on every sound, every shadow. Then I saw flashlight beams cutting through the darkness outside. Not from the street, but from the alley. Multiple beams moving fast. Voices shouting, "Police!" The relief that flooded through me was so intense I actually slid down the wall and sat on the floor. The dispatcher told me the officers were securing the perimeter, that I should stay inside until they cleared the area. Took another 5 minutes before someone knocked on the front door, proper knocking this time, with a voice calling out, "Police, ma'am, you're safe to open the door." They didn't find him. The officers searched the alley, the parking lot, the entire block. They found his coffee cup from earlier that night in the trash can outside, and they found something else. Fresh pry marks on the back door frame, like he'd been testing how easy it would be to force it open. They also found my phone had somehow sent that message to Jenna, even though I'd never hit send on the unsent draft. The officer said sometimes phones glitch under stress, messages get sent accidentally. But I remember deleting what I'd written and starting over. I remember the cursor blinking on "He's here again" without anything after it. The police filed a report, took my statement, checked the security camera footage. The camera showed everything I'd described. Him coming in, standing at the counter. Me going to the back room, him walking behind the counter. But when the power went out, the camera went out too. They saw him leave through the front door, saw him standing in the parking lot, and then nothing. Just static and darkness for the next 11 minutes until the power came back on. No footage of him at the back door. No evidence he'd even gone around the building. They told me I did the right thing by calling. They patrolled the area extra that night and the next few nights after. Diane finally agreed to schedule 2 people for closing shifts. I quit 3 weeks later anyway. I still don't know who he was. The police never identified him from the footage, never got any hits when they ran his description through their system. Sometimes I wonder if he was ever really planning to hurt me, or if he just liked the fear. If he got off on watching someone slowly unravel. I moved back to Augusta after that. Got a job at a bookstore that closes at 6 p.m. I don't work nights anymore. I don't work alone. And I never ever ignore my gut when someone makes me uncomfortable. Because the scariest thing wasn't what he did. It was realizing how close I came to unlocking that door. Nobody believes me when I tell them I don't remember most of that night. The cops didn't believe me, my parents didn't believe me, and the psychiatrist they made me see definitely didn't believe me. But here's the thing. I've got the photos to prove at least part of what happened, and my car was found exactly where I left it, so something went down in those woods outside Spokane. October 2022 was supposed to be my breakthrough month as a photographer. I'd finally worked up the guts to quit my job at a tech support call center in August, right after my 27th birthday, and my parents had given me some money from selling their house to keep me afloat while I built a portfolio. Every day I wasn't scrambling for freelance work. I was out shooting, forests, abandoned buildings, whatever looked interesting. That Friday afternoon, I found a forum post about Riverside Forest Preserve. This spot about 40 minutes northeast of the city that supposedly had killer autumn colors and almost 0 foot traffic. The photos people posted looked unreal. These golden aspens mixed in with dark pines, and the trails cut through terrain that would photograph like something out of a fantasy movie. I loaded up my Subaru around 3:30, throwing my camera bag and tripod in the passenger seat, along with a backpack that had water, an extra lens, and some granola bars I never ended up eating. The preserve wasn't some hardcore wilderness area. It was technically managed by the Forest Service with marked trails and everything, but it was far enough out that casual hikers didn't bother with it. I pulled into the gravel parking lot at 4:15, and the place was completely empty. Just my car and this weathered wooden sign showing a map of the trail system under scratched-up plexiglass. 3 different loops, ranging from 2 to 6 miles, all cutting through dense woods with a few ridgeline sections that looked perfect for what I wanted. The sun was already dropping toward the horizon, painting everything in that thick golden light that makes every photo look expensive, and I figured I had maybe 2 hours before it got too dark to shoot. I grabbed my gear, locked the car, pocketed my keys, and headed down the main trail into the trees. The temperature was dropping fast, probably mid-40s, and the woods had that particular smell of cold air mixing with decomposing leaves and pine sap. Everything was quiet except for my boots crunching on the path. The trail started out wide and well-maintained, packed dirt with the occasional route crossing it, but after maybe 10 minutes of walking it narrowed down to barely more than a deer path. I passed a few spots where smaller trails branched off into thicker woods, but I kept following the main route because the map had shown it led to a ridge with good sight lines. My camera was already out of the bag, hanging around my neck, because I kept seeing compositions I wanted to grab, the way the light filtered through the pine branches, clusters of bright orange mushrooms growing on a rotting log, that kind of thing. I wasn't in any rush. The whole point was to find 1 or 2 really solid spots and set up my tripod for some long exposure shots once the light got softer. About half a mile in, I found what I was looking for. The trail opened up where the ridge started, giving me this elevated view over a section of forest that dropped down into a small valley. The aspens were mixed in with the evergreens down there, creating these patches of yellow that looked incredible against the dark green. I could already visualize how the shots would look, maybe underexpose a bit to make the colors pop, shoot in RAW so I could really work the highlights in post. Perfect. I spent probably 15 minutes just walking around that ridge area. checking different angles and waiting for the light to hit just right. The sun was getting lower, maybe 45 minutes from setting completely, and the shadows were starting to stretch out long and dramatic across the forest floor below me. That's when I set up my tripod about 10 feet back from the edge of the ridge, right where the trail curved along the tree line. I mounted my camera, framed up a shot looking down the trail as it disappeared into the valley, and started making adjustments. The whole process was automatic by that point. Check the level, adjust the legs on uneven ground, dial in my settings. I took a few test shots, chimping the screen to check exposure, and everything looked good. But here's the weird part, and I didn't even notice it at the time. When I reviewed those photos later, really zoomed in and examined them, you could see something in the background. Way down the trail, maybe 100 yards into the trees, there was this shape that didn't quite match the surroundings. Not obvious. I wouldn't have caught it if I wasn't specifically looking, but it was there, like someone standing very still behind a cluster of thin tree trunks, just barely visible. At the time, though, I didn't see anything. I was focused on my composition, on getting the settings right, on capturing that specific quality of light before it disappeared. I kept shooting for another 20 minutes, moving the tripod around to different positions, trying various focal lengths. The woods were absolutely silent except for the occasional bird call, echoing from somewhere deeper in the preserve. No wind, no rustling, nothing. That kind of silence where you become hyper-aware of your own breathing, and every small sound you make seems too loud. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have the whole place to myself, how these shots were going to look amazing in my portfolio. Around 5:15, the light was starting to fade into that blue hour transition, and I decided to pack it in. I'd gotten what I came for, probably 40 or 50 shots that I knew included at least a few keepers. I collapsed my tripod, packed my camera back into the bag, and took one last look at the valley below. That's when I heard it. Not a loud sound, just this faint cracking noise, like someone stepping on a branch. It came from down the trail, the direction I'd been photographing toward. I turned and stared into the trees, waiting to see a deer or maybe another hiker, but nothing appeared. The forest had gone completely still again, that thick silence pressing in from all sides. I stood there for probably 30 seconds just listening and watching the trail ahead. The light was dim enough now that the shadows between the trees had turned into solid patches of darkness, making it hard to see more than 50 feet down the path. I called out, "Hello?" Felt stupid doing it, but I wanted to know if someone was there. No response. Just my voice getting swallowed up by the trees and then nothing. I told myself it was an animal, something moving through the underbrush off the trail, because what else would it be? But I'd been in plenty of forests before, and I knew what deer sounded like moving through woods. They make multiple sounds, leaves rustling, several branches breaking as they push through, hoofbeats if they're running. This had been one single crack, deliberate and sharp, like someone taking a step and putting their full weight on a stick. Shook it off and started walking back the way I'd come, following the trail toward the parking lot. My camera bag felt heavier now, the straps digging into my shoulders, and I was suddenly very aware of how quickly the temperature had dropped. My breath was visible in the air, these little clouds puffing out in front of me with each exhale. I walked faster than I normally would, not quite jogging but definitely moving with purpose, telling myself I just wanted to get back before it got completely dark. The trail that had seemed peaceful and beautiful an hour ago now felt different, claustrophobic, even though it was the exact same path. The trees seemed closer somehow, the shadows deeper. About halfway back to the parking lot, I heard it again. Another crack, same sound, but this time it was closer and definitely behind me. I stopped walking immediately, spinning around to look back down the trail. Nothing, just the darkening path disappearing into the trees, the last bits of twilight filtering through the canopy. My heart was hammering now, that primitive part of your brain screaming that something's wrong even when you can't see any actual threat. I waited, straining to hear any follow-up sound, any movement. Silence. Complete and total silence. Not even birds anymore. I started walking again, faster now, my boots hitting the trail hard enough that I was making plenty of noise myself. I didn't care about being quiet. Part of me wanted to make noise, wanted to announce my presence, like that would somehow make whatever was out there leave me alone. The rational part of my brain kept trying to calm me down. You're alone in the woods at dusk. You're psyching yourself out. There's nothing here. But that rational voice was getting quieter with every step. Another sound, and this time I knew I wasn't imagining it. Footsteps. Not animal sounds, not branches randomly falling. Actual footsteps moving through the forest parallel to the trail. I could hear them clearly now, matching my pace, staying maybe 20 or 30 yards to my right in the thicker woods where I couldn't see through the trees. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. I started again, slower this time, listening hard. The footsteps resumed, maintaining that same distance. My throat felt tight and my mouth had gone completely dry. Someone was out there pacing me, staying just out of sight in the darkening woods. I thought about calling out again, asking who was there, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said making noise, drawing attention to myself, was the wrong move. Instead, I kept walking, faster and faster, until I was basically jogging down the trail. The footsteps kept pace. Not running, not rushing, just matching my speed exactly. Like whoever it was didn't need to hurry because they knew where I was going. The parking lot was the only way out, and they knew I had to go there. I could see the trailhead up ahead now, maybe 100 yards away. The opening in the trees where it met the gravel lot. My car would be right there. Safety. I broke into an actual run, my camera bag bouncing against my back, my tripod banging against my hip where I'd strapped it to my pack. The footsteps in the woods sped up too, crashing through brush now, not bothering to be subtle anymore. They were running parallel to me, keeping pace, and I realized with absolute certainty that whoever it was could see me, but I couldn't see them. The trail curved slightly, and then I burst out into the parking lot, gasping for air, my lungs burning from the cold and the exertion. My Subaru was exactly where I'd left it, sitting alone in the gravel lot that was now almost completely dark. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, my fingers numb and clumsy. And that's when I realized the footsteps had stopped. The woods behind me were silent again. I didn't turn around to look. I didn't want to see if someone was standing at the tree line watching me. I just got my keys out, hit the unlock button, and heard the beep and saw the lights flash. I yanked open the driver's door and practically threw myself inside, immediately hitting the lock button. The sound of all 4 doors locking simultaneously was the most comforting thing I'd ever heard. I sat there in the driver's seat, breathing hard, staring at the steering wheel while my hands shook from adrenaline. The dome light was still on, giving me a little bubble of visibility inside the car, and I could see my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was pale and sweaty despite the cold. I needed to start the car and get out of there, but for some reason I couldn't make myself put the key in the ignition yet. I was trying to process what had just happened, trying to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just another hiker who happened to be walking the same direction as me. But I knew that wasn't true. Nobody hikes off trail in the dark, and nobody matches someone else's pace that perfectly by accident. That's when I saw the movement in my passenger side mirror. Just a flicker, something shifting position near the tree line about 40 feet behind my car. My entire body went rigid. I stared at the mirror, not daring to turn around and look directly, and then I saw it again. Definitely a person, standing just inside the shadow of the trees. They were tall, wearing dark clothes that blended with the forest, and they were completely still, facing my car. I couldn't make out any features in the darkness, couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, couldn't see their face. They were just standing there, watching. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I jammed the key into the ignition with shaking hands and turned it. The engine started immediately, thank God, and I threw the car into reverse without even checking behind me, just desperate to move, to get away from that figure. I backed up maybe 10 feet before slamming on the brakes and shifting into drive, and in that brief moment when my reverse lights lit up the area behind me, I saw them clearly. They'd moved. They were closer now, maybe 20 feet from where my car had been parked, standing in the middle of the gravel lot. Still not moving, still just watching. The reverse lights went off as I shifted gears, and the figure disappeared back into darkness. I floored the accelerator, spitting gravel everywhere as my tires spun and caught, and I tore out of that parking lot like something was chasing me, which I guess something was. I don't remember the drive home. I know that sounds insane, but I have zero memory of the 40-minute trip back to my apartment. The next thing I clearly remember is sitting in my living room with all the lights on, still wearing my jacket, my camera bag on the floor next to me. My phone said it was almost 8 o'clock, which meant I'd lost about an hour and a half somewhere. I chalked it up to shock, to my brain just being on autopilot while I drove. But it bothered me. Still bothers me. I sat there for a long time, maybe another hour, just trying to calm down and make sense of what happened. Eventually, I convinced myself to pull out my camera and look at the photos I'd taken. Maybe there was something in them, some explanation, some detail I'd missed. I uploaded the SD card to my laptop and started going through the images one by one. The early shots looked exactly how I remembered. Beautiful golden light, the aspens, the valley, everything perfectly normal. But then I got to the later photos, the ones I'd taken from the ridge right before I started packing up. I zoomed in on one of them, just examining the composition, and that's when I saw it. Way down the trail in the background, barely visible between the trees, there was a person standing there. Not walking, not moving, just standing motionless, facing the camera, facing me. I went through every single photo from that location, and they were in 4 of them, always in the same spot, always perfectly still. In 2 of the images you could barely make them out, just a dark vertical shape that could have been a tree trunk if you weren't looking carefully. But in the other 2, where the angle and lighting were slightly different, you could see it was definitely a human figure. They were too far away to make out any details. No face, no clothing specifics, nothing that would help identify them. Just a person-shaped shadow standing deep in the woods, watching me work. I felt sick looking at those photos. This person had been there the whole time I was shooting, just standing motionless in the trees, and I never saw them. Never had any idea they were there until I heard that first branch crack. How long had they been watching before that? Had they followed me from the parking lot? Were they already in the woods when I arrived? The police asked me all these questions later, and I didn't have answers to any of them. What I did next was probably stupid, but I was terrified and not thinking clearly. I grabbed my phone and called 911. Told them everything. The footsteps, the figure in the parking lot, the person in my photos. The dispatcher kept me on the line and said they'd send someone to check out the preserve. 2 officers showed up at my apartment about 45 minutes later to take my statement and look at the photos. They were professional about it, wrote everything down, but I could tell they thought I was overreacting. One of them even suggested maybe it was just another photographer who happened to be shooting in the same area. The next morning, I got a call from the sheriff's department that made everything so much worse. They'd sent officers to check the preserve at first light, and they found my car in the parking lot. My car. The same Subaru I'd driven home and parked outside my apartment building. The one I was staring at through my window while talking to the detective on the phone. Except it wasn't the same car, obviously. Mine was here. But there was a blue 2004 Subaru Outback with my exact license plate sitting in that gravel lot with the driver's door wide open, keys in the ignition, and my tripod still set up at the trailhead facing the woods. They ran the plates multiple times. They matched. They checked the VIN through the windshield. It matched. The detective asked me very carefully if I was absolutely certain I'd driven home last night, if there was any possibility I'd left my car there and gotten a ride with someone. I told him to look outside my building. My car was right there. He went quiet for a long time, then said they'd send someone to verify. 2 different officers came to my apartment within an hour, examined my car, photographed it, checked the VIN. Same car. Same exact car that was simultaneously sitting in the Forest Preserve parking lot 40 minutes away. They eventually figured out what happened, though the explanation didn't make me feel any better. Someone had cloned my license plates, probably saw my car parked somewhere around Spokane, noted the make and model, and made duplicates of my plates to put on their own vehicle. Same year, same color Subaru. It's apparently more common than you'd think, usually for toll evasion or parking ticket avoidance. But this person had driven their cloned car to the preserve after I left, parked it in the exact same spot, and staged it to look like I'd never made it out of those woods. Door open, keys in the ignition, tripod set up. Like I'd vanished mid-shoot. The police theory was that whoever followed me in the forest had intended to do something. Rob me, attack me, worse. But I'd gotten away. So they went to plan B, making it look like something terrible had happened to me in those woods. Maybe hoping to throw off an investigation, or just fuck with me psychologically. They never found who did it. No prints on the abandoned car, no security cameras in the area, nothing. The vehicle had been reported stolen from a lot in Spokane 3 days before, and it was eventually returned to its owner. The whole case just died, but I know what I saw. I know someone stalked me through those woods, someone who had already gone through the effort of cloning my plates and planning something elaborate and disturbing. I haven't been back to any forest preserve since then. Can't bring myself to shoot anywhere isolated. And sometimes when I'm going through old photos on my hard drive, I'll see those images from that day and zoom in on that figure standing in the trees, and I'll wonder if they're still out there, watching someone else, waiting in the woods with a camera and a stolen car and God knows what else. That's what keeps me up at night. Not what happened, but what was supposed to happen if I hadn't run fast enough. October in Kentucky gets dark early, and that particular evening in 2016 was no exception. I'd been babysitting for the Andersons for about 6 months by then. They lived 40 minutes outside Lexington on this old tobacco farm that had been converted into a regular house sometime in the 80s. The property sat on 12 acres of mostly empty fields, with the nearest neighbor being a good half-mile down the gravel road. I remember driving out there that night, watching the sun disappear behind the tree line while my beat-up Corolla struggled with the unpaved driveway. The Andersons had 2 kids, Chloe, who'd just turned 7, and her little brother Noah, who was 4. Sweet kids, never gave me any trouble, always went to bed when they were supposed to. Their parents were attending some medical conference in Louisville. Dr. Anderson was a pediatrician, and his wife Nancy worked as a nurse at the same hospital. The house itself was one of those sprawling ranch-style places with windows everywhere. Floor to ceiling in the living room, big bay windows in the kitchen, regular windows in every bedroom. Nancy Anderson loved natural light, she'd told me once. Couldn't stand feeling boxed in. That night, though, with darkness pressing against all that glass, I wished there were fewer ways to see outside. Or more accurately, fewer ways for someone outside to see in. The kids and I had dinner around 6:30. Mac and cheese with hot dogs cut up in it because that's what Noah always requested. We played some board games afterward, Candyland mostly, and I got them into their pajamas by 8. While they brushed their teeth, I noticed the motion sensor light by the garage kept turning on. Probably deer, I figured. The Andersons had mentioned deer came through the property all the time, eating from Nancy's vegetable garden. But the light would click on, stay bright for its programmed 30 seconds, go dark for maybe a minute, then flash on again. Like something was walking back and forth out there, just beyond where I could see. Around 8:30, after both kids were tucked in their beds, I settled into the living room couch with my sociology textbook. I was finishing my degree at Eastern Kentucky University, just had 1 semester left. The house was quiet except for the dishwasher humming in the kitchen and the occasional creak that old houses make. I'd been reading for maybe 20 minutes when I heard it. 3 distinct knocks on the dining room window. Not frantic or aggressive, just 3 measured taps like someone politely trying to get your attention. I looked up from my book, staring at the dark glass, but couldn't see anything beyond my own reflection in the lamplight. The motion light by the garage wasn't on anymore. I waited, listening, telling myself it was probably a tree branch. The Andersons had this big oak that grew close to that side of the house. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. I went back to my reading, though I kept losing my place in the same paragraph about social stratification. Then came 3 knocks on the kitchen window. Same rhythm, same pressure, like knuckles against glass. The kitchen was on the opposite side of the house from the dining room. No trees on that side, just open field stretching toward the woods. I got up slowly, leaving my textbook on the couch, and walked to the kitchen doorway. The overhead light was off. I'd only left the small light above the stove on. Through the window above the sink, blackness, just my ghostly reflection staring back. The knocking came again, this time on the living room window, the huge floor-to-ceiling one. 3 taps. Deliberate, patient, whatever was doing this was circling the house. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, thumb hovering over the emergency call button. But what would I say? Someone's knocking on windows? They'd think I was paranoid. The Andersons lived so far out that kids playing pranks seemed unlikely. But the alternative made my chest tight with a fear I didn't want to name. I decided to check on the kids first. Climbing the stairs as quietly as possible, I peeked into Noah's room, then Chloe's. Both were sound asleep. Noah sprawled out like a starfish with his dinosaur stuffed animal. Chloe curled up under her purple comforter. Their peaceful breathing should have calmed me, but instead it made me feel more responsible, more alone. As I stood in the hallway between their rooms, the knocking started again. This time on the window at the end of the hall, right behind me. 3 taps. Then immediately after, 3 taps on Noah's bedroom window, then Chloe's. Whoever was outside knew exactly where we all were, knew the layout of the house. My mouth went dry. I hurried back downstairs, grabbing the house phone from the kitchen counter. The Andersons had a landline because cell service was spotty out here. As I picked up the receiver, I saw something that made me stop breathing for a second. There was condensation on the outside of the kitchen window, like someone had been standing there, breathing against the glass. The knocking suddenly became rapid, urgent, moving from window to window so fast it seemed impossible for one person. Kitchen, living room, dining room, back door, garage door window, all around the house in a frantic circle. Not 3 polite taps anymore, but demanding pounds that rattled the frames. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I told the dispatcher someone was trying to break in. She kept me on the line, said deputies were on their way, told me to lock myself and the kids in a bathroom. But before I could move, everything stopped. Complete silence. No knocking, no footsteps outside. Even the dishwasher had finished its cycle. The dispatcher was still talking, but I barely heard her. Something about the sudden quiet felt worse than all that knocking. Through the kitchen window, I could see the motion light by the garage click on again. This time, illuminated in its harsh white glow, I saw someone standing at the very edge of its range. They weren't moving, just standing there facing the house, too far away to make out features, but close enough that I could tell they were tall, wearing something dark, maybe a coat or a long jacket. The figure raised one arm and waved at me. Slow, deliberate, like we were old friends meeting across a parking lot. Then they turned and walked backward into the darkness, keeping their face toward the house the entire time until the black swallowed them completely. The motion light clicked off. I told the dispatcher what I'd seen, and she said to get the children and lock ourselves in the bathroom now. But as I turned toward the stairs, I heard the front door handle jiggling. Not aggressive, just testing, seeing if it was locked. It was, I'd checked it twice already. The handle stopped moving. Then I heard the same sound at the back door in the kitchen. Testing. The side door by the garage. Testing. Every exterior door, one after another, like they were making sure I'd secured everything. My legs felt weak as I forced myself up the stairs. I grabbed Noah first, his small body heavy with sleep, then rushed to Chloe's room. She stirred when I picked her up, mumbling something about a bad dream. If only she knew. I carried them both into the master bathroom, locked the door, and set them down in the bathtub with some towels as cushions. Chloe woke up more fully then, confused and scared by my behavior. I told her we were playing a game, like hide and seek, but we had to be very quiet. Noah stayed asleep, curled against his sister. The dispatcher was still on the line, telling me the deputies were 8 minutes out. 8 minutes feels like hours when you're hiding in a bathroom with 2 kids, straining to hear any sound from downstairs. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of glass sliding. The Andersons had this old sliding window in the laundry room that didn't lock properly. Nancy had mentioned getting it fixed, but hadn't gotten around to it yet. The window was small, but an adult could squeeze through if they really wanted to. I heard something hit the laundry room floor. A soft thud, like feet landing. Footsteps, slow and careful, moving through the house. Not rushing, not searching frantically, just walking like they had all the time in the world. They stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I held my breath, pulling Chloe closer, my hand over her mouth gently to keep her from speaking. The first stair creaked, then the second. Whoever was in the house was coming upstairs. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and paused. Through the gap under the bathroom door, I could see a shadow blocking the hallway light. They were standing right outside, not moving, not trying the handle, just standing there, breathing. I could actually hear them breathing, deep, steady breaths like they were trying to calm themselves down or maybe savoring the moment. The dispatcher was whispering that deputies were 3 minutes away, but her voice sounded tinny and distant through the phone pressed against my ear. Then the person outside spoke, and it was worse than any scream or threat could have been. A normal voice, conversational, almost friendly. "I know you're in there with them. I knocked first." That was me being polite. The voice belonged to a woman, maybe middle-aged with this slight rural Kentucky accent. "You shouldn't have called anyone. Now it's all messed up. The timing, the way it was supposed to happen." She sighed, like she was genuinely disappointed. "I've been watching this house for months, learned their schedules when they'd need a babysitter. You're earlier than usual tonight. That wasn't part of the plan." My mind raced trying to place the voice, but I'd never heard it before. She kept talking through the door, calm as if we were chatting over coffee. "The Andersons don't know me, but I know them. Know that Nancy leaves that laundry room window unlocked. Know that Dr. husband of hers keeps cash in his office downstairs, hidden in that ugly ceramic vase. Know those kids' names, their bedtimes, their favorite snacks." She tapped on the door, just once, gentle. "See? I used to live in this house, 20 years ago, before the bank took it, before my whole life fell apart in these rooms. My daughter's nursery was where little Noah sleeps now. Painted it yellow myself, though they've covered it with that blue. Coming back here, walking through at night when everyone's sleeping, it's the only time it feels like home again." Her voice cracked slightly. "But you had to go and ruin it. Had to be awake, had to see me, had to make those calls. Now they'll arrest me and I'll never get to walk through my house again." The shadow under the door shifted, and I heard her slide down to sit against the wall. The message on the window was for next time, but there won't be a next time now, will there? Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The woman stood up quickly. "They're here faster than I thought they'd be." Her footsteps moved away from the bathroom door, back toward the stairs. "You take good care of those babies. They sleep so peaceful, don't they? I never meant any harm. Just wanted to walk through my old life sometimes. Remember when things made sense." I heard her going down the stairs, not rushing but not dawdling either. The front door opened. She must have unlocked it from the inside. Through the small bathroom window, I could see red and blue lights flashing across the trees. The dispatcher was saying something about staying put until deputies cleared the house, but I was focused on listening to what was happening downstairs. Car doors slamming, shouts, the woman's voice, tired now. "I'm not armed. I used to live here, that's all. I just wanted to come home." There was a scuffle, commands to get on the ground, the metallic click of handcuffs. Chloe was crying quietly, and I held her tighter, Noah finally stirring in the tub. 2 deputies eventually came upstairs, announced themselves, and told us it was safe. Later, after the kids were back in their beds and I'd given my statement 4 different times, one of the older deputies told me her name was Judith Brennan. She lost the house in 2007 after her husband died, and left behind massive medical debt. Her daughter had passed away from leukemia in what was now Noah's room. She'd been breaking into the house for almost a year, always when the family was gone, never taking anything, just walking through the rooms. The Andersons had noticed small things, furniture slightly moved, windows they thought they'd locked found unlocked, that kind of thing, but assumed they were misremembering. Tonight was different because she knew they'd hired a babysitter, thought I'd fall asleep on the couch like apparently the girl before me used to do. When I stayed awake, when I noticed her, she panicked and tried to scare me into leaving. The message she traced on the kitchen window while I was hiding upstairs, "Don't open the door again," wasn't a threat. According to her, it was advice. She didn't want anyone else letting strangers into what she still considered her home. The Andersons came back that night, cutting their conference short. They moved 2 months later. I never babysat there again, but sometimes I drive past that house and wonder if Judith still watches it from somewhere in the darkness, waiting to go home. My student loans had just hit 5 figures when I downloaded the rideshare app that October. I'd been staring at my laptop screen in my cramped studio apartment near the University of Oklahoma, doing the math for the 100th time, trying to figure out how to stretch my work-study paycheck from the campus bookstore to cover rent, food, and gas for my 2009 Honda Accord. The solution was obvious. I needed another income stream. My cousin had been driving for one of those apps in Dallas and claimed she made decent money on weekends, especially late nights when surge pricing kicked in. I figured Norman had enough bars and enough students without cars that I could make it work. Plus, the Accord had just passed inspection. The interior was clean enough, and I'd always been good with directions even before GPS made it idiot-proof. 6 weeks into this side gig, I'd developed a routine. Thursday through Saturday nights from 10 until around 2 in the morning, sometimes later if the money was flowing. That Friday night had been steady but unremarkable. I'd already made 4 trips by the time midnight rolled around. 2 sorority girls heading to Bricktown, an older gentleman who needed a ride home from his shift at the hospital, a group of grad students bar-hopping on Campus Corner, and a very drunk guy who spent the entire ride showing me pictures of his German Shepherd. My earnings were sitting at about $70 after gas, which meant I could actually buy something besides instant noodles that week. I was parked in a McDonald's parking lot, scrolling through my phone and debating whether to call it a night, when the app chimed with another ride request. The pickup location made me pause. It was way out by the abandoned warehouses near the Canadian River, at least 15 minutes from where I was sitting, but the estimated fare showed $28, and the destination just said, River Area. Vague, but not unusual. Sometimes people put in general areas and gave specific directions once you picked them up. The drive out there took me through parts of Norman I usually avoided after dark. The streetlights got fewer and farther between as I headed south, following the GPS through neighborhoods where half the houses had plywood over the windows and cars sat on blocks in front yards. My headlights swept across empty lots full of tall grass and the occasional shopping cart tipped on its side. The radio started picking up more static than music, so I switched it off and drove in silence except for the GPS's occasional "continue straight." When I finally reached the pickup spot, it was just a gravel pull-off next to a rusted gate that had probably once led to some kind of factory or processing plant. A single streetlight about 50 yards away cast this weak orange glow that made everything look sickly. I couldn't see anyone at first, and I was about to cancel the ride and get out of there when a figure stepped out from behind a concrete barrier near the fence. The man who approached my car moved with this weird, deliberate slowness, like he was being careful about each step. He wore a long wool coat that looked expensive but old-fashioned, the kind with a high collar that businessmen wore in those black and white movies my grandmother used to watch. His face was hard to make out in the dim light, but I could see he was clean-shaven with dark hair combed straight back, with what looked like too much product. When he opened the back door and slid in, the dome light illuminated him for just a second. Pale skin, maybe mid-40s, with these deep-set eyes that didn't quite meet mine in the rearview mirror. "Good evening," he said, and his voice had this formal quality to it, like someone who'd learned English from old textbooks. "I need to go to the old houses near the river, the historic ones." I asked him for a specific address, explaining that I needed something to put into the GPS, but he just waved his hand dismissively. "Just drive toward the river. I'll tell you when we're close." I started driving, heading east toward where I knew the Canadian River curved through town. The app was showing an error message when I tried to input the destination, just spinning endlessly, so I had to rely on his directions. Every few minutes he'd lean forward slightly and tell me to turn left or right, always in that same measured tone. Left at the stop sign, right after the yellow house, straight through this intersection. What made my chest tighten was that each turn took us through neighborhoods I knew well. First past the elementary school where I'd tutored kids for community service credits, then by the park where my study group sometimes met on sunny days. We were heading toward the older residential areas on the east side, where professors and longtime residents lived in those big Victorian-style houses with wraparound porches. The closer we got to my own neighborhood, the more I kept checking the mirrors, watching him sit perfectly still in the back seat, his hands folded in his lap like he was in church. After about 10 minutes of this guided tour through increasingly familiar streets, I couldn't ignore it anymore. We were definitely heading toward my apartment complex, not just the general area, but taking the exact route I drove home every night. When we passed the convenience store where I bought milk every Sunday, only 3 blocks from my building, I finally spoke up. "Hey, these old houses by the river, can you be more specific? Because we're getting pretty far from the Canadian River now." He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window at the passing houses. Then, in that same calm voice, he said, "Rivers change course over time. The old maps show different paths." That response made absolutely no sense, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to pull over and tell him to get out. But we were so close to my neighborhood that I worried he might already know where I lived, and I didn't want to escalate things while we were alone on a dark street. When we turned onto Sycamore Avenue, my street, I made a split-second decision to drive past my apartment building and keep going toward the actual historic district another mile east. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. I watched him in the rearview mirror, trying to see if he was looking at the buildings we passed, if he was checking the numbers, if he recognized where we were. But he just sat there with this blank expression, occasionally glancing down at something in his lap. That's when I noticed he had a piece of paper, folded into a small square, that he kept turning over in his fingers. "The house with the blue trim," he suddenly said, and my whole body went rigid. My apartment building had blue trim around the windows. It was one of the reasons I'd chosen it, because it reminded me of my parents' house back in Tulsa. "What house with blue trim?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "There are several around here." He leaned forward then, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something sharp and medicinal, like old aftershave mixed with hospital disinfectant. "You know which one," he said quietly. I slammed on the brakes right there in the middle of the street, not caring anymore about being polite or professional. My finger was already on the emergency button on my phone that would call 911, and I turned around to face him directly. "Get out of my car, right now. The ride is over." But when I turned around, the back seat was empty. The door on the passenger side was hanging wide open, interior light illuminating the worn fabric seats. But he was gone. Not walking away, not running down the street, just gone. I sat there for maybe 5 seconds, too stunned to move before scrambling to check that all my doors were locked. That's when I saw it, the piece of paper he'd been holding, now unfolded and sitting on the middle of the back seat. With shaking fingers, I reached back and grabbed it. It was an old map, the kind from a gas station, probably from the 80s based on the faded colors and style. Someone had drawn a red circle around a specific spot, and when I looked closer, my entire body went cold. It was my apartment building, not just the street or the block, but the exact building, with my unit number written in small, neat handwriting next to it. Apartment 237. I drove straight to the police station, not even thinking about going home. The map was clutched in my hand the entire time, wrinkled from my sweaty grip. The officer at the front desk, a tired-looking woman with graying hair pulled back in a bun, listened to my story with the kind of patient expression that told me she'd heard stranger things. She took the map, put it in an evidence bag, and had me fill out a report. When I showed her the ride request on my phone app, though, her expression changed. There was no record of the pickup, no ride history, no payment pending, nothing. According to the app, my last ride had been the drunk guy with the German Shepherd photos, completed at 12:47 a.m. It was now 2:15 a.m., and according to my phone, I'd somehow lost over an hour. The officer suggested maybe the app had glitched. Maybe someone had tried to request a ride and it hadn't gone through properly. But we both knew that didn't explain the map or how he knew my address. They sent a patrol car to follow me home and check my apartment before I went inside. The two officers, both younger guys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, walked through each room while I waited in the hallway. They checked the closets, looked behind the shower curtain, even opened the kitchen cabinets for some reason. "All clear," one of them told me, handing back my keys. "Make sure you lock up tight, maybe put a chair under the doorknob if it makes you feel better." After they left, I did exactly that. Chair under the doorknob, kitchen knife on my nightstand, every light in the apartment blazing. I didn't sleep that night, just sat on my couch watching the door and jumping at every sound from the hallway. Around sunrise, I finally started to doze off when I heard something that made me bolt upright. The distinct sound of paper sliding under my door. I crept over, knife in hand, and saw it. Another folded piece of paper. This time it was a receipt from a hardware store dated that morning, 6:23 a.m. Someone had purchased a single item, a copy of a key. The billing address at the bottom was mine, and the last 4 digits of the credit card matched my own. I called 911 immediately, my voice cracking as I explained about the receipt. While I waited for the police to arrive again, I called my credit card company from my laptop, hands trembling as I typed in my account information. There it was, a pending charge from Hartman's Hardware, time-stamped exactly as the receipt showed. The woman on the phone assured me they would reverse the charge and flag it as fraud, but that didn't explain how someone had my card information or why they wanted me to know they'd copied a key. When the police arrived this time, it was a different officer, an older man named Officer Briggs, who actually seemed to take me seriously. He bagged the receipt and called for a locksmith to come change all my locks immediately, on the department's dime. While we waited for the locksmith, he sat with me in my living room and asked detailed questions about the man from the ride, writing everything down in a small notebook. "Has anyone been following you lately? Any weird encounters at work or school? Ex-boyfriends, rejected guys from dating apps, anything like that?" I told him no to everything, but then remembered something that made my breath catch in my throat. About 3 weeks earlier, I'd given a ride to another passenger late at night, a younger guy who'd been completely silent the entire trip except for one comment. When we'd passed my neighborhood, I'd noticed because we took the same exit off the highway, he'd said, "Nice area, safe, good for young women living alone." I'd thought it was a creepy thing to say, but figured he was just making awkward small talk. Now I wondered if he'd been fishing for information, if maybe he'd watched me drive home after dropping him off. Officer Briggs wrote it all down and promised they'd pull security footage from the hardware store, check traffic cameras from that night, do everything they could. The locksmith arrived and spent 2 hours replacing every lock, even adding a deadbolt to my bedroom door at my request. For the next 3 days, I stayed with my cousin in Oklahoma City, too scared to be alone in my apartment. When I finally went back, Officer Briggs called with an update. They'd found the man on the hardware store security footage. Tall, wool coat, same description I'd given. But his face was always turned away from the cameras, like he knew exactly where each one was positioned. The credit card fraud department traced the breach to a skimmer that had been found on an ATM near campus, one I'd used the week before. As for the man himself, he'd paid cash at the hardware store and left no other trail. I quit driving for the rideshare app that same day, deleted it from my phone without even cashing out my final earnings. The money wasn't worth it anymore. I broke my lease 2 weeks later, taking the financial hit to move in with 3 other girls from my economics class who needed a 4th roommate for a house near campus. My new room was on the 2nd floor with a window that faced the backyard, no street access, and I made sure to vary my route home every day, never falling into a pattern. For months afterward, I'd wake up at night thinking I heard paper sliding under my door, but it was always just the wind or the house settling. Officer Briggs checked in with me periodically for about 6 months, always asking if I'd noticed anyone following me or if anything else strange had happened. Nothing ever did. The man with the wool coat never tried to contact me again, never showed up at my new place, just vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared in my back seat that night. Sometimes I wonder if he got what he wanted, just to scare me, to prove he could find me, to show me how vulnerable I was driving strangers around in the dark. The strangest part came almost a year later when I was cleaning out my old backpack to donate it. In one of the inner pockets, I found another piece of that same old map, folded into a tiny square. This piece showed a different part of Norman, an area I'd never been to, with another red circle drawn around what looked like an empty lot near the river. I gave it to Officer Briggs, who had it tested for fingerprints, but like everything else connected to that night, it led nowhere. He mentioned that they'd had 2 other reports from rideshare drivers about similar incidents, passengers who knew too much, who gave directions to the driver's own neighborhoods, who disappeared leaving behind cryptic messages or items. None of the cases were ever solved, and the police theorized it might be someone with a fascination for scaring young women, someone who studied their routines through the apps and credit card records. They increased patrols around the areas where drivers typically waited for rides and sent out warnings through the rideshare companies, but as far as I know, they never caught anyone. I still have nightmares sometimes about that cologne smell, that measured voice saying, "You know which one," and the way he just vanished from my back seat. I work at a call center now, boring but safe, and I take the bus everywhere even though I still have my Honda. Some nights when I'm walking home from the bus stop, I catch myself looking back, checking if anyone's following, wondering if somewhere out there he's still requesting rides, still studying his maps, still leaving his calling cards for other terrified drivers to find. The October wind had that particular bite to it when I pulled into the Sunoco station just outside Harrisburg that night, the kind that makes you zip your jacket all the way up, even though you're only stepping out for a minute. I'd been driving freight trucks for about 12 years at that point, and my daughter had just started middle school that fall, which meant I was pushing harder to get home each evening instead of crashing at the depot like I used to. The station sat at the intersection where Highway 83 meets that stretch of nothing before you hit the suburbs, one of those places that feels abandoned even when there are people around. The fluorescent lights above the pumps kept flickering, creating these weird shadows that danced across the concrete, and I remember thinking they really needed to fix those before someone had a seizure. My Silverado's tank was running on fumes, and I still had another 40 minutes before I'd see my driveway, so stopping wasn't really optional. I swiped my card and started pumping, doing that thing where you lean against the truck bed and zone out while watching the numbers climb on the display. The only other customer was some guy in a rust-covered sedan 3 pumps over, already pulling away, leaving just me and the teenage clerk visible through the store windows, his face lit blue by his phone screen. That's when I heard footsteps, quick ones, almost like someone was jogging, and this woman appeared from around the side of the building where they keep the air pump and vacuum cleaners. She looked maybe 40, wearing a navy cardigan that was way too thin for the weather, jeans with mud stains on the knees, and these white sneakers that squeaked against the wet pavement. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had mostly fallen apart, blonde strands sticking to her forehead with sweat despite the cold, and she had this way of glancing behind her every few seconds that immediately put me on edge. "Excuse me, sir, I'm really sorry to bother you," she said, and her voice had this raspy quality like she'd been yelling or crying recently, maybe both. She stayed about 6 feet away from me, which I appreciated because it meant she wasn't trying to get too close too fast. But her eyes kept darting between my face and the road behind the station. I know this is going to sound crazy, but there's been this car following me for the past 20 minutes, ever since I left the Walmart over in Camp Hill, and I pulled in here hoping they'd keep going, but they didn't. She wrapped her arms around herself, and I could see her fingernails were painted this chipped purple color, with dirt underneath them like she'd been digging in garden soil. My phone's dead, and I just need a ride to my sister's place down on Paxton Street. It's literally 5 minutes from here. I can show you exactly where if you have GPS. Now, I've got 2 younger sisters myself, and I'd want someone to help them if they were in trouble. But I've also been around long enough to know that gas stations at night are where bad decisions often start. The pump clicked off at exactly $42.17, and I stood there holding the nozzle, trying to figure out if this woman was genuinely scared or if this was some kind of setup. That's when I noticed it. This dark blue Chrysler 300 parked behind the dumpster area where deliveries get unloaded, positioned so you'd miss it unless you were really looking. The engine was definitely running because I could see exhaust coming from the tailpipe in the cold air, but the headlights were completely off, and through the windshield I could make out 2 shapes in the front seats, just sitting there, perfectly still. The woman must have seen me notice them because she grabbed my wrist, not hard but desperate, and her palm was ice cold and clammy against my skin. "Please, they're right there, you can see them yourself," she whispered, and now her whole body was trembling, these little shudders that made her cardigan shake. I tried to lose them by taking random turns, even drove through a McDonald's drive-thru without ordering anything, but they stayed right behind me the whole time. She let go of my wrist and pulled out a wallet from her back pocket, flipping it open to show me a driver's license with her picture on it, though I couldn't read the name in the dim light. "Look, I'm a real person. I work at the CVS pharmacy on Union Deposit Road. I'm not trying to rob you or anything crazy like that. I just need to get away from those people." Her voice cracked on the word people, and she kept rubbing her arms like she was trying to warm up, but I could tell it was more about nerves than cold. The Chrysler's engine suddenly revved, not loud enough to seem aggressive, but just enough to let us know they were paying attention, and the woman actually stepped closer to my truck, putting it between her and them. I put the gas nozzle back and screwed my cap on, taking my time while I tried to think through the situation. Part of me wanted to just tell her to go inside and ask the clerk to call the cops, but another part kept thinking about my daughter, how I'd lose my mind if some creep was following her around. "All right, here's what we're going to do," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my pulse was hammering. "You're going to get in the passenger side, but keep your hands where I can see them the whole time, and we're going to drive straight to the police station on South Cameron Street, not your sister's place." She nodded so fast I thought she might give herself whiplash, already moving toward the passenger door. But that's when things got weird in a way that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. The driver's side door of the Chrysler opened, and this man stepped out, probably 6'3", wearing a black pea coat and jeans, completely normal looking except for the fact that he was wearing sunglasses at 9:30 at night. He didn't walk toward us, just stood there beside his car, hands in his pockets, facing our direction like he was waiting for something. The woman practically dove into my truck, slamming the door and immediately hitting the lock button, then fumbling with the seatbelt like her fingers weren't working right. Through the windshield, I could see the second person in the Chrysler lean forward, and the dashboard light illuminated their face for just a second. Another man, younger maybe, with a baseball cap pulled low. "Drive, please just drive," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper, and she was crouched down in the seat like she was trying to make herself smaller. I started the engine and put it in drive, purposely taking the route that would bring us past the front of the store where the cameras were, and as we pulled away, I watched in my mirrors as the tall man got back into the Chrysler, smooth and unhurried like he had all the time in the world. They didn't turn their headlights on until we were already on the access road, and then those bright HIDs blazed to life, staying exactly 3 car lengths behind us no matter how I adjusted my speed. "What did you do to piss these guys off?" I asked, trying to sound casual while my knuckles went white on the steering wheel. The woman was twisted around in her seat, watching them through the back window, and her breathing was coming in these short, sharp gasps like she might hyperventilate. "I don't know them, I swear to God I don't know them," she said, and her voice had this raw edge of genuine terror that's hard to fake. "I was just shopping for groceries, normal Wednesday night stuff, and when I came out they were parked right next to my car, just sitting there with the engine running." She turned back around and pressed her palms against her eyes like she was trying to push away a headache. At first I thought maybe they were waiting for someone else, but then they followed me out of the parking lot, and every turn I made, every lane change, they were right there. The Chrysler suddenly accelerated, closing the gap between us to maybe 1 car length, and their high beams flashed twice, deliberate and measured. I pressed harder on the gas, my truck's V8 responding immediately, and took a sharp right onto Industrial Road without using my signal, tires squealing slightly on the cold asphalt. The Chrysler made the turn perfectly, like they knew exactly what I was going to do before I did it. And now they were riding our bumper so close, I could see the tall man's face in my rearview mirror, still wearing those sunglasses, his expression completely blank. The woman started digging through her purse frantically, pulling out a dead iPhone, some crumpled receipts, a prescription bottle that rattled with pills, and finally a small canister of pepper spray that she clutched like a lifeline. "The police station is just another 2 miles, I said, trying to reassure both of us, but then the Chrysler did something that made my whole body go rigid. They pulled into the oncoming traffic lane like they were going to pass us, except there was a semi-truck barreling toward us from the opposite direction, headlights blazing, horn blaring in one long, terrified note. For 3 seconds that felt like hours. The Chrysler stayed right beside us, the passenger window rolled down, and the younger man was pointing something at us. Not a gun, but a phone, recording everything. Then they dropped back behind us just as the semi roared past, missing them by maybe 2 feet, the wind from it rocking my truck sideways. "Jesus Christ, they're insane," I muttered, my heart slamming against my ribs, and I grabbed my own phone from the cup holder, trying to dial 911 while keeping us on the road. The woman was sobbing now, real ugly, crying with snot and everything, her pepper spray hand shaking so bad I was worried she'd accidentally spray us both. "They're going to kill us, they're actually going to kill us," she kept saying, rocking back and forth in the seat. And I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I wasn't sure anymore. The 911 operator picked up just as the Chrysler rammed us from behind, not hard enough to spin us out, but enough to jolt us forward, my phone flying out of my hand and sliding under the seat. The woman screamed, this piercing shriek that made my ears ring, and in the mirror I could see the tall man had taken his sunglasses off finally, revealing eyes that were completely calm, almost bored-looking, like this was just another Wednesday night for him. That's what scared me most. Not the aggression, but the casual indifference, like we were just items on a checklist he needed to cross off. I yanked the wheel hard left onto a side street, tires screaming against the pavement, and floored it past dark houses where normal people were probably watching TV or getting ready for bed, completely unaware of the nightmare playing out 30 feet from their front doors. The Chrysler stayed with us, their engine roaring as they matched every move, and I could hear the woman hyperventilating beside me, these ragged gasps between sobs that sounded like she might pass out. "There's a fire station up here," I shouted, remembering it from my routes. Always people there, always lit up, and sure enough I could see those bright bay doors glowing like salvation about a quarter-mile ahead. But the Chrysler must have realized where we were heading because they suddenly accelerated hard, pulling alongside us again. And this time the passenger window was all the way down and the younger man was leaning out, holding something that glinted in the streetlights. Not a gun, but a tire iron. And he swung it at my side mirror with this controlled precision that shattered it completely, glass exploding across the side of my truck. The woman went silent, that kind of shocked quiet that's somehow worse than screaming, and I could see her lips moving like she was praying, but no sound was coming out. We were maybe 500 feet from the fire station when the Chrysler suddenly slammed on their brakes and spun into a perfect J-turn, heading back the way we'd come like they'd never been chasing us at all. I skidded into the fire station lot, barely missing a parked ambulance, and stopped right in front of the open bay where 3 firefighters were washing a truck. They looked up, startled, water hoses still in their hands, as I basically fell out of my door on legs that felt like jelly. The woman stayed in the truck, still clutching that pepper spray, staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. The firefighters called the cops, and 2 officers showed up within minutes, taking our statements while we sat on a bench outside the station. The woman wrapped in one of those silver emergency blankets even though she insisted she wasn't cold. They found the Chrysler abandoned about 2 miles away. Stolen plates, interior wiped clean, like professionals had been using it. The really sick part came 3 days later when I saw on the news that they'd found a woman's body in a drainage ditch off Highway 83. And while they never confirmed it was connected, the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The woman I'd helped disappeared from the fire station while I was giving my second statement to the detectives. Just gone, like she'd never existed, leaving only that prescription bottle she'd dropped in my truck. The label was torn where the name should have been, but I could make out part of an address in Mechanicsburg. I drove by once, about a month later, and it was just an empty lot with a "for sale" sign, grass grown tall like nothing had ever been built there. I still take a different route home now, even though it adds 20 minutes to my drive, and sometimes I wake up thinking about those calm, bored eyes in my rearview mirror, and wondering if maybe I wasn't the one being tested that night, if maybe she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and I was just the random factor they hadn't counted on. The GPS died right when we needed it most, somewhere between Clearfield and Bellefonte, on a stretch of Route 322 that seemed forgotten by time. I remember joking with Vanessa about how we were probably the youngest people to drive through here since the Clinton administration. We just celebrated my 31st birthday the week before, and this spontaneous trip to visit her sister in State College was supposed to be a fun detour from our usual Philadelphia routine. The engine started making that grinding noise around 9 at night, just as the last traces of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. We managed to coast into the gravel parking lot of a place called the Whispering Pines Motor Lodge, though the neon sign had half its letters burnt out so it read more like W is ring P-E's. Vanessa grabbed my arm as we sat there in the sudden silence of the dead engine, both of us staring at the single lit window in what looked like the office. A yellowish glow that seemed too warm, too inviting for a place that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. The man behind the desk must have been watching us from that window because he opened the door before we even made it halfway across the parking lot, standing there with this huge grin that showed all his teeth. "Car trouble?" he called out, and something about the way he said it made me think he already knew the answer. His name tag read Leonard, and he had this way of standing too close when he talked, like he was sharing a secret even when he was just telling us about the rooms. He kept insisting we take room 7, right next to the office, saying it was their best one with the newest mattress and the strongest water pressure, practically pushing the key into my hand before I'd even finished filling out the registration card. Vanessa tried asking about calling a tow service, but Leonard just kept nodding and smiling, saying, tomorrow, everything's closed now, you folks just get some rest." The way he watched us walk to our room, standing in that doorway with the light behind him casting his shadow all the way across the parking lot, I kept thinking about how a spider must look to a fly, patient and still and somehow satisfied. Room 7 had that smell all old motels have, like carpet cleaner fighting a losing battle against decades of cigarette smoke and mildew. The wallpaper was this faded green pattern that looked like eyes when you weren't looking directly at it, and the bed made a sound like breaking bones when we sat down to test it. Vanessa went straight to the bathroom while I played with the television, trying to get anything other than static on the ancient box that probably predated cable itself. That's when I noticed the connecting door to room 8, painted the same ugly beige as the walls, but with fresh scratches around the deadbolt, like someone had tried to open it from the other side recently. The vent above it was enormous, one of those old metal grates that probably connected the whole row of rooms for heating, and I could swear I heard something moving through it, a soft shuffling like fabric against metal. Leonard had been so insistent about us taking this room, and now, looking at that door with its single deadbolt and those scratches, I wondered what was on the other side that made room 7 so special. We tried to settle in for the night, telling ourselves we'd deal with everything in the morning when the sun was up, and the world made sense again. Vanessa found a deck of cards in the nightstand drawer, along with a Bible that had whole pages torn out and what looked like fingernail marks on the cover, and we played a few hands of rummy just to have something normal to focus on. Around 11:30, just as we were thinking about trying to sleep, we heard it. 3 soft knocks on the connecting door, so gentle they could have been accidental, except they came in a perfect rhythm: knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. We both went completely still, cards forgotten on the bedspread between us, waiting to see if we'd imagined it. Then came the whispering through the vent, 2 voices maybe, or 3, having what sounded like an argument in hushed tones, the words just unclear enough that we couldn't make them out, but distinct enough that we knew they were words. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard what sounded like furniture being quietly moved, dragging sounds across carpet, and then Leonard's voice, clear as day, saying, "They're perfect, absolutely perfect." Vanessa grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks, her eyes wide in the dim light from the bathroom we'd left on, and we both knew we needed to get out of that room immediately. I crept to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain just an inch, trying to see if anyone was in the parking lot, and that's when I realized the office was completely dark, not just closed but abandoned looking, like it had been empty for hours. Our car sat there useless in the same spot, and beyond it, parked behind the office where we hadn't noticed it before, was a white van with mud-covered plates and what looked like heavy blankets covering the back windows. The whispering from the vent stopped suddenly, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse, like everyone on the other side of that door was holding their breath, waiting. I motioned for Vanessa to grab our things, moving as quietly as possible, shoving our phones and wallets into our pockets, leaving everything else behind. We had made it to the main door, my hand on the deadbolt, when we heard the unmistakable sound of a key sliding into the lock of the connecting door from the other side. The deadbolt on the connecting door held, but we could hear multiple keys jingling, someone trying different ones, and Leonard's voice came through the vent again, no longer whispering but speaking in a normal tone like he knew we could hear him. "Now don't make this difficult, folks. We've done this 12 times before without any fuss." Those words hit me like ice water, 12 times before, and suddenly every news story I'd ever ignored about missing couples flashed through my mind. Vanessa was already at the main door, turning the lock as quietly as she could, but it wouldn't budge, like it had been secured from the outside somehow. The window was our only option, one of those old motel windows that's supposed to slide sideways but has been painted shut so many times it might as well be welded closed. I grabbed the desk chair and swung it at the glass while Vanessa pushed the dresser against the connecting door, which was now rattling violently as someone threw their weight against it. The window exploded outward in a shower of glass, and cold October air rushed in, bringing with it the sound of doors opening all along the motel, not just 1 or 2, but what sounded like every single room emptying out at once. We went through that window like our lives depended on it, which they did. Vanessa first and then me, both of us landing hard on the concrete sidewalk outside, glass crunching under our feet. Behind us, I could hear the connecting door finally give way, wood splintering as the dresser toppled over, and Leonard's voice shouting instructions to someone named Carl about blocking the highway. We ran toward the tree line behind the motel, about 50 yards of open ground that felt like miles, and I could hear footsteps spreading out behind us. Not just 1 or 2 people, but what sounded like a dozen, their feet hitting the gravel in an organized pattern like they'd done this before, like they knew exactly how to hunt people in the dark. The woods were thick with undergrowth that tore at our clothes and faces, But we pushed through, Vanessa's hand in mine, both of us breathing so hard it hurt, branches snapping under our feet loud enough to give away our position to anyone listening. Behind us, flashlight beams cut through the trees in coordinated sweeps, and I heard Leonard's voice, calm and almost amused. They always run to the woods every single time. The ground suddenly dropped away beneath us, and we tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling through dead leaves and mud until we splashed into a creek at the bottom, the freezing water shocking us both into silence. We pressed ourselves against the bank, hidden under the overhang of roots and earth, listening to the footsteps above us moving in a line, systematic and patient like they were grid-searching the area. Vanessa was shaking so hard I had to hold her tight to keep her teeth from chattering and giving us away, and we stayed there in that freezing water for what must have been an hour, maybe more, listening to our hunters move back and forth above us, occasionally calling out to each other in code words that meant nothing to us, but clearly meant something to them. At one point, someone walked right above our hiding spot, dirt and pebbles raining down on us, and we held our breath until spots danced in my vision. Then gradually the sounds moved away, back toward the motel, and we heard vehicle engines starting up, multiple vehicles, and the sound of them driving away in different directions. But not all of them. We could still hear at least one engine idling in the distance, waiting. We stayed in that creek until the first hints of dawn started showing through the trees. Both of us so cold, we could barely feel our legs when we finally crawled out. Following the water downstream seemed safer than going back up the embankment, so we waded through the shallow parts, supporting each other when one of us stumbled, until we came to a place where the creek passed under a small bridge, an actual road, not just another forest trail. We climbed up to it carefully, checking both directions multiple times before stepping onto the asphalt, and that's when we saw the gas station about a quarter-mile down, its lights bright and welcoming in the early morning gloom. The attendant, a woman named Rosie according to her name tag, took one look at us, soaked, muddy, covered in cuts and scratches, and immediately called 911 while wrapping us in blankets she pulled from behind the counter. She kept asking what happened, but all I could manage was the Whispering Pines Motor Lodge, and her face went completely white. "That place has been closed for 3 years," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "ever since they found those bodies in the crawl space under room 8. The state police found our car still sitting in that gravel lot, but the motel looked different in daylight. Abandoned, windows boarded up, the office door hanging open on broken hinges showing nothing but an empty room full of debris and old furniture covered in dust. Room 7's door was standing open too, and inside they found our suitcases exactly where we'd left them, but the connecting door to room 8 had been sealed with concrete blocks years ago, according to the construction date someone had written on the mortar. The officers kept exchanging looks when we insisted there had been people there, at least a dozen of them, and Leonard at the desk checking us in. But then one of them found fresh tire tracks behind the office, multiple vehicles just like we'd said, and suddenly they were taking us very seriously. They brought in dogs and more officers, and within hours they'd found the underground entrance hidden in the woods about 200 yards from the motel, a storm cellar door covered with branches that led to a tunnel system someone had dug to connect to the motel's original basement. Inside, they found mattresses, chains bolted to the walls, and personal belongings that would eventually be matched to 7 missing couples from the past 2 years. They never caught Leonard or any of the others, though the FBI got involved and set up a whole task force dedicated to finding them. The investigators told us we were lucky, that most people who get taken to places like that don't make it out, and they kept asking if we remembered any other details, any names besides Leonard and Carl, any identifying features. But trauma has a way of making things fuzzy, and all I could really remember clearly was that smile of Leonard's and the sound of all those doors opening at once. We testified before a grand jury 6 months later, helped them put together a timeline of events, looked at hundreds of photos trying to identify anyone. But these people were ghosts. No fingerprints in the database, no DNA matches, nothing. The only real lead came from analyzing the tunnel system, which showed construction techniques consistent with mining operations from the 1980s, suggesting at least some of them had that kind of background. Vanessa and I tried to go back to normal life in Philadelphia, but we ended up moving to Colorado 2 years later, somewhere far from any rural motels, somewhere with lots of lights and people and no connecting doors in hotel rooms. The nightmares stopped eventually, mostly, though I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear that soft knocking pattern. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. And Vanessa can't stand the sound of keys jingling without going completely rigid. We keep in touch with Detective Morrison, who ran the investigation, and every few months he calls to tell us about another abandoned motel they've searched, another tunnel system they've found, always empty by the time they get there. Like Leonard and his group just pack up and move on to the next place whenever they feel the heat getting close. The last time Morrison called, about 3 months ago, he mentioned they'd found something interesting in an abandoned motel near the West Virginia border. Registration cards in a hidden drawer, dozens of them, all filled out in different handwriting but all for room 7. And our names were there along with 23 other couples, dated over a 5-year period. Only 7 couples were ever reported missing, which means the rest either were never reported or, and this is what keeps me up at night, they're still out there somewhere in places no one's thought to look yet. Morrison thinks Leonard's group is still operating just more carefully now, maybe using campgrounds or vacation rentals instead of motels, and he always ends our calls the same way. Keep your doors locked, and if you ever break down on a rural road again, sleep in your car. The mornings back then were quiet, and the bus stop outside my neighborhood always felt strangely isolated, despite being just a few blocks from the main road. My name's Emily, and at the time I was 17, juggling early classes and a part-time job at a small bookstore. The bus shelter was made of glass panels with faint scratches that caught the morning light, and I used to lean against one of them with my headphones in, half awake, half dreaming. The street across from the stop had a row of houses that looked almost identical. Same trimmed hedges, same mailboxes tilted forward like they were listening. It was the kind of place where nothing unusual ever happened, until it did. On a Wednesday morning, I noticed a man standing across the street. He was tall, maybe in his late 40s, wearing a gray coat that looked a size too big for him. At first, I assumed he was just another commuter waiting for someone to pick him up. He had a brown paper cup in his hand and seemed focused on the traffic, barely moving. Still, something about how still he stood made me glance at him every so often. When the bus arrived, I forgot about him and went on with my day, not realizing I would start seeing him again. Every morning after that. By the 3rd day, it had become routine. I'd reach the bus stop around 7:05, and he'd already be there. Same coat, same spot, same stillness. Sometimes he'd tilt his head slightly, like he was trying to catch something in the distance. I told myself he was probably walking to work after watching his kid get on the bus or something harmless like that. But what unsettled me was how I never actually saw him leave. The bus would come, and as it pulled away, he'd still be there, standing in the same place as if frozen in a loop. It was around the 5th morning that my sense of comfort began to unravel. I had overslept and rushed out the door without my usual coffee, expecting to see the empty stop for once. But he was already there, closer this time, on my side of the street, standing near the edge of the glass shelter. He wasn't looking at me directly. His eyes were angled toward the panel beside me, almost like he was examining a reflection. That's when I realized he wasn't facing the street at all. He was watching me through the glass. The next morning, I asked my mom to drop me off instead of taking the bus. She laughed at first when I told her about the man, but I could tell from her face that she was uneasy too. That evening, she called the transportation office and asked if the shelter had security cameras, and surprisingly, they said yes. One mounted high on a nearby lamppost. The following night, we drove over there after dinner. The streetlights flickered unevenly, and the shelter's glass reflected our car headlights back at us like a warning. My mom parked, and we just sat there for a moment, watching that same spot where he used to stand. Empty, of course. We got permission from the bus company to review the footage a day later. The technician set up the recording on a small monitor, scrubbing through the mornings one by one. There he was, standing perfectly still across the street on Monday, then closer on Wednesday, then right by the shelter by Friday. But what chilled me wasn't the proximity. It was how he never looked at the road. In every clip, his gaze was locked on the glass panel, even when no bus came. When I showed up, he'd subtly angle his head, lining his eyes with mine through the reflection. Mom called the school afterward, and they contacted local police. I expected that to be the end of it, just a creepy stranger caught on camera. But when the officer checked traffic footage from other intersections, they found something worse. He had been following the route my bus took, walking or sometimes catching another bus behind mine, all the way to school. There were short clips of him standing at corners, watching the same bus number go by every morning. The footage didn't show what he did after, but it was enough to make my stomach knot up every time I left the house. The next day, my mom drove me to school herself. I kept glancing at the sidewalks, half expecting that gray coat to appear again between cars. For a few days, nothing happened. The police said they'd patrol the area near the stop, and the driver was told to report anything strange. Then, early that Sunday before sunrise, my mom found something tucked between our front door and the frame. A crumpled bus schedule with my route circled in red ink. The police took the schedule as evidence, but there were no fingerprints, nothing they could trace. They assumed it might have been someone from the neighborhood trying to scare me, but my mom disagreed. She started driving me everywhere. School, work, even the grocery store. I stopped going out alone. Still, the sense of being watched didn't fade. Sometimes I'd see a gray blur near the edge of a parking lot or behind a fence, and my heart would start pounding before I could even think. I could never confirm it was him, but the feeling lingered like a shadow you can't shake off. 2 weeks later, a patrol officer knocked on our door. He said they had identified the man through transit records. His name was Charles Avery, a 52-year-old who lived 3 neighborhoods away. He had been reported before for following young girls near different bus stops, but always disappeared before they could press charges. When the officer showed me his photo, it was him. The same blank stare, the same oversized coat. They issued a restraining order, but I knew that piece of paper wouldn't stop someone like him if he really wanted to find me. After that, my mom decided to move. It wasn't a dramatic move across the country, just a few towns over, but it felt like starting over. New routes, new streets, no glass shelters. For months, I refused to stand near bus stops or anything reflective. Even mirrors made me uneasy. The police said they hadn't seen him again, but I caught myself checking rearview mirrors and windows, expecting those eyes to appear behind me in the faint reflection of glass. It has been years now, and I still take a different route home every week, just in case. I never saw him again, but every morning when the light hits a bus shelter or a store window, I can't help but glance at the reflection before I step closer. Sometimes I think about how long he must have been there before I ever noticed him. How many times he might have been watching, hidden in plain sight. The apartment my boyfriend and I moved into last spring was small, but it finally felt like ours. We were both working late shifts back then, and the building had this quiet hum at night, like everything outside the walls just stopped existing. It should have felt peaceful, but sometimes that silence felt too heavy, almost expectant. About 2 weeks after settling in, we started hearing footsteps in the hallway after midnight. Not quick ones. Slow, steady, and always stopping near our door. We laughed it off at first, telling ourselves it was probably a neighbor getting home late or the pipes creaking. But every night, around the same time, the sound returned, pausing right outside like someone was listening. After the 3rd night, my boyfriend Ethan decided to check through the peephole. He said the hallway was empty, lights dim, nothing moving except for the shadow of the plant near the stairwell. Still, I could tell by the way his voice tightened that it bothered him. The next morning, we found a faint smudge on the lower part of the door, like someone had brushed their hand there. It was oily, grayish, almost like residue from a glove. That was when we agreed to install a security camera outside the door. Ethan ordered one online that could stream directly to our phones. He spent half of Saturday afternoon setting it up, double-checking every angle until the hallway looked perfectly centered in the frame. For a few nights, things went quiet. I would check the camera feed before bed and feel this small sense of relief, seeing nothing but the still hallway and the dim light flickering above the elevator. Then, about a week later, I woke up around 3 in the morning and instinctively opened the app. The live feed showed someone standing at the far end of the hallway, just where the light started to fade. They were facing our direction, not moving. The person didn't come closer, didn't knock, just stood there. I woke Ethan, but by the time he grabbed his phone, the figure was gone. We replayed the clip, but for some reason the motion detection hadn't saved it. The next day, Ethan adjusted the sensitivity settings and set up notifications. We tried to go back to normal, convincing ourselves maybe it was a glitch or maybe one of the neighbors wandering half asleep. A few days later, though, we checked the recordings again, and there he was. Same spot, same hour, 2:37 in the morning. The figure stood right at the edge of the camera's view, barely lit, wearing what looked like a dark jacket. The face was impossible to make out, but what unnerved me most was the posture, perfectly still, like he was waiting for something. We decided to keep watching over the next few nights before calling the police, hoping maybe it would stop on its own. That night, Ethan and I sat up together, watching the live feed until after 3. Nothing happened. Around 2:37, the hallway remained empty, the camera showing only the hum of that faint light. We were about to shut off our phones when a shadow flickered at the far edge of the frame, not entering, just lingering. It looked like a shoulder, the curve of someone standing half behind the corner. The motion alert went off and Ethan leaned forward, whispering something like, "He's back." But again, the moment we tried zooming in, the figure disappeared. It was as if the camera glitched the exact second we focused on him. By then, sleep was impossible. We emailed the footage to the property manager and asked if there had been any reports of someone wandering the halls. He replied the next morning saying the building was quiet and there were no maintenance staff working overnight. He even checked the other floor cameras, but ours was the only one showing that dark silhouette. That reply didn't bring much comfort. It only made the whole thing feel more targeted. Like whoever that man was, he had chosen our floor for a reason. Ethan tried to laugh about it, calling it our personal ghost, but the joke landed flat. 2 days later, I went through the recordings while Ethan was at work. My hands were trembling slightly, partly from lack of sleep. Every night, exactly 2:37, the same shape appeared, same spot, same stillness. But when I paused the latest clip, I noticed something different, a faint logo on the man's jacket sleeve. I zoomed in as far as the grainy footage allowed, and the words, "Swift Drop Delivery" came into view. I had never heard of that company before. I checked online, expecting to find some local courier service, but there was nothing. No listings, no reviews, not even a logo match. Ethan called the police that evening. 2 officers came by, reviewed the footage, and took a copy with them. They told us they'd try enhancing it. The younger one, Officer Delgado, asked if we'd recently ordered any packages or groceries. We hadn't. When he came back a few days later, his tone had changed. Quieter, more serious. He said the footage enhancement showed the man's jacket clearly, and that Swift Drop Delivery wasn't a registered business in our city. It didn't even exist in the state database. When Ethan asked if they could track the logo or uniform, Delgado hesitated before saying, "That's the strange part. This logo was used by a company that shut down 8 years ago, after one of their drivers went missing on his route." After hearing that, I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made me tense up, waiting for the next notification. Ethan wanted to take the camera down for a while, said it was making us paranoid, but I refused. If that man came back, I wanted proof. The next night, I left the live feed running on my phone while we tried to rest. The hours dragged by until 2:37 arrived again. This time, the camera picked him up closer, not right by the door, but a few feet nearer than before. He stood there for about 10 seconds, then turned his head slightly toward the lens as if acknowledging it. Then he walked out of frame, disappearing into the stairwell. Ethan ran into the hallway seconds later, phone flashlight on, but the place was empty. No sound of footsteps, no movement. When he came back in, he was pale and said the air in the hallway smelled faintly like gasoline. We checked the footage again and froze at what we saw. Before leaving, the man had set something down by the stairwell, a small brown parcel. The police came immediately after we called. The package contained nothing but an old photo, wrapped in a delivery invoice from SwiftDrop dated 8 years ago. The name on it was unfamiliar to us, but the address printed below was our apartment number. Officer Delgado said they'd investigate the name. He came back 2 days later with an update that made my chest tighten. The name on that invoice belonged to the previous tenant, a man who'd gone missing nearly a decade ago, right after reporting that someone had been following him home from work. Delgado didn't say much more, only that the case files mentioned a suspect wearing a delivery jacket. Ethan and I decided to move out the following week. I tried to leave the camera with the new tenant, but I could not bring myself to explain why. It has been months since then, and I still check the app out of habit, even though the camera's offline. The last clip saved before we left shows the empty hallway, time-stamped 2:37 in the morning. For a second, the light flickers, and something faint appears near the edge. A shape, maybe, or a reflection. I do not watch it anymore. The police never found the man, and SwiftDrop remains a company that does not exist. But sometimes, around that hour, I wake up without reason and feel the quiet pressing in from outside, like someone's still standing there, waiting to be seen. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The exhaustion hit different that night. You know how it gets when you've been running on fumes for 16 hours straight at the hospital. 29 and already feeling like 50. Working as an emergency room nurse in Cleveland had become my whole life, especially after my divorce finalized earlier that year. The highway stretched ahead of me like a black ribbon, completely empty except for the occasional semi-truck thundering past in the opposite direction. Must have been around 2 in the morning on a Wednesday in late October, when everything went sideways. The radio kept cutting in and out with static, which should have been my first warning that something wasn't right. But honestly, I just figured it was the old antenna on my beat-up Ford Explorer acting up again. All I wanted was to get home, take the hottest shower possible, and collapse into bed before my next shift started in 10 hours. The figure appeared in my headlights about 3 miles from my exit, standing right on the edge of the shoulder, where the asphalt meets the gravel. My first thought was that someone had broken down, which happens all the time on that stretch of Interstate 71 between downtown and the suburbs. The person was waving both arms above their head in that desperate way people do when they really need help, wearing what looked like a dark jacket with the hood pulled up. My nursing instincts kicked in immediately, that automatic response to help someone in distress that gets drilled into you during training. But as I started easing off the gas pedal and drifting toward the shoulder, something made me glance at my rearview mirror. And that's when I noticed how dark the road behind me had become. Like all the streetlights had suddenly gone out even though they'd been working fine just seconds before. That's when I saw them. Two shapes emerging from behind the concrete guardrail on the passenger side, moving in this weird, synchronized way that made every alarm bell in my head start screaming. They weren't running or walking normally, more like gliding forward while staying perfectly parallel to each other, maybe 15 feet apart. The person who'd been waving suddenly dropped their arms and stood completely still, not even turning their head to track my car as I was slowing down. My foot hesitated between the brake and the gas for what felt like forever, but was probably only a second or two. The two figures from the guardrail were wearing identical clothing, dark pants, and what looked like gray hoodies, and they moved toward my car with this terrifying sense of purpose, like they'd done this exact thing 100 times before. My nursing training includes dealing with aggressive patients and dangerous situations, but this was something else entirely. Something calculated and wrong in ways I still can't fully articulate. I slammed the accelerator so hard my tires screamed against the pavement, fishtailing slightly as I jerked the wheel back toward the travel lane. In my side mirror, I caught a glimpse of all three figures standing in a perfect line across the shoulder, just watching my taillights disappear into the distance. My phone was in the cup holder, and I grabbed it while trying to keep the Explorer steady at 90 miles per hour, fumbling with the emergency call button. The dispatcher who answered sounded skeptical at first, probably used to false alarms and paranoid drivers, but something in my voice must have convinced her because she said units were already in the area and would check it out immediately. I kept driving way too fast all the way home, checking my mirrors every few seconds and taking a different exit than usual, just in case anyone was following me. The adrenaline didn't start wearing off until I pulled into my apartment complex and sat there in the parking lot with the engine running, scanning every shadow between the buildings. My neighbor, this retired cop named Frank, who always sits on his balcony smoking cigarettes even in the middle of the night, waved at me and called down, asking if everything was okay. I must have looked pretty shaken, because he actually came downstairs in his bathrobe and slippers to check on me. When I told him what happened, his whole demeanor changed, and he said there'd been similar reports along that stretch of highway for the past few weeks. Always late at night, always with the same pattern of someone flagging down cars while others waited nearby. The call from the police came about an hour later, after I'd finally made it inside and was sitting on my couch still wearing my scrubs, clutching a cup of coffee with both hands. The officer on the phone introduced himself as Sergeant Brennan and said they'd found something disturbing at the location I'd described. There were fresh tire marks that matched my vehicle's tread pattern where I'd accelerated away, which proved I'd actually stopped there. But here's what made my whole body go numb with fear. They also found a burned-out sedan about 50 yards further down the shoulder, hidden behind a cluster of trees. The car had been reported stolen from a mall parking lot 3 days earlier, and inside they found personal items suggesting someone had been living in it, including maps of the highway system, with certain spots circled in red marker, my exit being one of them. Sergeant Brennan asked me to come to the station the next morning to look at some security footage they'd pulled from a traffic camera about a mile before where I'd stopped. When I got there, still exhausted but too wired to sleep anyway, they showed me grainy black and white video from earlier that same night. Around midnight, 2 hours before my encounter, the camera captured what looked like 3 people dragging something heavy from a van into the woods near that exact spot. The van didn't have plates, and the image quality was too poor to make out faces, but you could see them making multiple trips back and forth. Then, about 30 minutes before I drove through, the camera caught them positioning themselves along the shoulder, with one person standing in the spot where I'd seen the waving figure, while the other 2 crouched behind the guardrail exactly where I'd seen them emerge. What really disturbed me, though, was what Sergeant Brennan told me next, while we sat in that sterile interview room with fluorescent lights humming overhead. They'd been tracking a group they suspected of running a sophisticated carjacking ring that targeted solo drivers on isolated stretches of highway. The burned car wasn't their vehicle. It belonged to a woman named Jennifer Huang who'd been reported missing 5 days earlier after leaving her night shift at a warehouse 40 miles north. Her credit cards had been used at various gas stations heading south, always late at night, always just one transaction before moving on. The police theorized that the group would use stolen vehicles until they burned them out, literally, to destroy evidence, then move on to acquiring a new one from whoever stopped to help their supposedly stranded member. The detective working the case, a woman named Carla Donovan with tired eyes and coffee stains on her sleeve, showed me Jennifer's photo from her missing person report. She looked about my age, wearing scrubs in the picture because she'd been a nurse too, working nights at a regional medical center. That detail hit me harder than anything else, knowing that we'd probably driven that same stretch of highway hundreds of times, both exhausted after long shifts, both alone in the dark. Detective Donovan said they suspected I wasn't the first person to escape this trap. There'd been 2 other reports in the past month of drivers who'd had similar encounters, but managed to speed away. The difference was that neither of them had called it in immediately like I did, and by the time they reported it days later, there was no evidence left to investigate. They kept me at the station for 3 more hours, going through every detail multiple times, having me mark on a map exactly where I'd seen each figure and which direction they'd moved. The forensics team had found footprints in the gravel that suggested at least 4 people had been present, not just the 3 I'd seen, which meant someone else had been watching from somewhere I hadn't even noticed. Detective Donovan mentioned that they'd also discovered a pattern in the timing. All the encounters happened on weeknights between midnight and 4 in the morning, when traffic was lightest and emergency response times were longest. She gave me her direct number and told me to call immediately if I remembered anything else, or if I noticed anyone following me, because sometimes these groups would fixate on the ones who got away. For the next 2 weeks, I completely changed my routine, taking different routes home, varying my schedule whenever possible, and always leaving the hospital with at least one other person walking to the parking garage. Frank, my neighbor, started checking on me every night when I got home, and I'd text Detective Donovan each time I arrived safely, which probably seemed excessive but gave me some peace of mind. Then, on a Monday afternoon, I got the call that they'd made arrests after pulling over a van on that same stretch of highway for a broken taillight. Inside were 4 people, including a woman who matched the description of the figure who'd been waving that night, along with rope, zip ties, and 3 different stolen license plates. They found Jennifer Huang's hospital ID badge hidden under the spare tire, along with personal items from at least 6 other missing persons cases spanning 3 states. The trial won't start for another few months, but Detective Donovan says my testimony will be crucial, since I'm the only witness who called immediately and provided real-time evidence of their method. Jennifer Huang is still missing, along with 2 other victims they've connected to this group, and honestly, that's what haunts me most about this whole experience. I still work nights at the hospital because bills don't stop just because you're scared, but I take the city streets now instead of the highway, adding an extra 20 minutes to my commute. Sometimes when I'm driving home and see someone on the side of the road, even in broad daylight, my chest gets tight and I have to remind myself to breathe. The thing that really stays with me, though, is knowing that if I'd stopped just a few seconds longer, if I'd actually gotten out to help like my instincts first told me to, I would have been another missing person case, another burned out car on the shoulder, another nurse who never made it home from her shift. At 31, I'd been driving cross-country routes for my job as a medical equipment sales rep for almost 6 years, and I'd never had anything worse happen than a flat tire in broad daylight. That night in early September 2022 changed everything about how I travel now. I'd just finished a late presentation at a hospital in Des Moines and was heading to my next appointment in Kansas City, figuring I'd drive through the night and grab a motel room when I got there around 4 in the morning. My silver Toyota Camry had been acting up lately, making this weird grinding noise whenever I turned left too sharply, but my mechanic buddy told me it was probably just the power steering fluid getting low. Nothing urgent. I'd been meaning to get it checked properly, but between back-to-back sales trips and my recent divorce proceedings with Brian, I kept pushing it off. The highway stretched out empty ahead of me, one of those long rural stretches where the nearest town is 40 miles in either direction, just cornfields and darkness on both sides. The temperature gauge started creeping up around midnight, right when I was passing through the absolute middle of nowhere on Highway 169. First, it just nudged past the center mark, which happens sometimes on long drives, but within 5 minutes it was climbing toward the red zone, and I could smell that distinct burnt sweet odor of overheating coolant. I pulled over onto the shoulder, my hazard lights clicking in rhythm with my quickening heartbeat, and killed the engine before any serious damage could happen. Steam started hissing out from under the hood almost immediately, creating these ghostly white wisps in my headlight beams that dissipated into the darkness. The silence hit me like a physical weight once the engine stopped ticking and pinging as it cooled down. No cricket sounds, no wind through the corn, just absolute stillness broken only by the metallic cooling sounds of my engine. I checked my phone and of course 0 bars, not even emergency service, which seemed impossible. But there it was, that dreaded no service message mocking me from the screen. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, door locked, windows cracked just enough to keep the interior from fogging up, scrolling through useless offline apps on my phone just to have something to do with my nervous energy. Every few minutes I'd pop the hood release and walk around to check if the steam had stopped, but the engine was still way too hot to even think about removing the radiator cap. The owner's manual in my glove compartment said to wait at least 30 minutes before attempting anything, and even then, only if you had coolant or water to add, which of course I didn't, because why would I ever think to keep emergency supplies in my car like a responsible adult? That stretch of 169 was notorious for being empty at night, mostly used by truckers during daylight hours, and locals who knew better than to drive it after dark. I'd passed maybe 3 vehicles in the last hour before breaking down, and that was during the relatively busy midnight hour. Now, approaching 1 in the morning, the chances of seeing another car were getting slimmer by the minute. The first hint of hope came as a faint glow on the horizon behind me, barely visible in my side mirror, just a slight brightening of the darkness that meant headlights were coming from several miles away. I actually said thank God out loud to myself and started rehearsing what I'd say to whoever stopped, already planning to offer them $50 just to follow me to the nearest gas station once my car cooled down enough to limp there. The lights grew steadily brighter, taking forever to close the distance, which made sense given how flat and straight the highway was in that area. As they got closer, I could make out that it was something big, definitely not a regular car, maybe a pickup truck or an SUV based on how high and widely spaced the headlights were. I turned on my phone's flashlight and got out of the car, standing by my open driver's door and getting ready to wave them down, figuring nobody could miss a woman standing next to a car with hazards going on an otherwise empty highway. The vehicle started slowing down about a quarter mile away, which gave me this huge wave of relief, because for a second there, I thought they might just blow past me like I wasn't even there. But then it kept slowing down, way more than necessary, crawling forward at maybe 5 miles per hour for the last 100 yards or so. The headlights were blinding me directly now, making it impossible to see anything about the vehicle itself except that it was definitely a van, one of those tall commercial types, maybe white or light gray from what I could glimpse around the light glare. It finally came to a complete stop directly across from me in the opposite lane, engine running rough and loud, like it needed a new muffler, or maybe had some kind of modification to make it sound more aggressive. The headlights stayed on full brightness, pointed right at me and my car, and I had to shield my eyes with my hand while waiting for someone to roll down a window or open a door. But nothing happened. The van just sat there maybe 15 feet away, engine rumbling in this deep, irregular rhythm that seemed to vibrate through the empty highway and into my chest. 30 seconds passed, then a minute, and still no movement from the van, no dimming of the lights, no window rolling down, nothing. I couldn't see through the windshield at all because of how the headlights were angled and how they were reflecting off my car's windows and chrome, creating this wall of harsh white light between us. I waved my phone flashlight in a friendly greeting motion and called out, "Hey, thanks for stopping." But my voice sounded thin and weak against the rumbling engine noise. When there was still no response, I took a few steps forward, thinking maybe they couldn't hear me, but then stopped myself because something about the whole situation was starting to feel wrong in a way I couldn't quite define. The logical part of my brain was saying they were probably just being cautious, maybe an older person who was scared to get out and help a stranger at night, or possibly someone on the phone trying to call for help on my behalf. But the primitive part of my brain, that ancient survival instinct we all have, was screaming at me to get back in my car right now. I slowly backed toward my Camry, keeping my eyes on the van even though I couldn't see anything useful through the light glare, and slid back into the driver's seat without turning my back on the other vehicle. My fingers found the door lock button and I pressed it, hearing all 4 locks engage with a solid thunk that made me feel marginally safer, even though I knew how useless those locks would be if someone really wanted to get in. The van's engine note changed slightly, revving up a bit like someone was pressing the gas pedal while in park, and then I saw something that made my whole body go rigid with fear. The driver's door was opening, just a crack at first, maybe 2 or 3 inches, but enough for me to see that the interior dome light had been removed or disabled because no light came on inside. The door stayed open like that for at least 10 seconds, just barely ajar, and I could swear I saw movement in that dark gap, like someone was watching me through the opening. Then, just as suddenly as it had opened, the door pulled shut with a solid thump that I could hear even over the engine noise. My car key was already in my hand, and I shoved it into the ignition, turning it even though I knew the engine was still too hot and probably wouldn't start without causing serious damage. The starter motor whined in protest and the engine tried to turn over but couldn't quite catch, just making these horrible grinding sounds that I knew meant expensive repairs, even if I got out of this situation. The temperature gauge was still showing way too high, but I didn't care anymore because that van door opening had changed everything about what this was. I tried starting it again, pumping the gas pedal like that would somehow help, and this time the engine caught for maybe 2 seconds before dying with a shudder that shook the whole car. Through all of this, the van hadn't moved an inch, just sat there with its headlights burning into my retinas. But now I noticed something else that made my situation even worse. There was another set of headlights in my rearview mirror, coming up from behind me, moving slowly just like the van had done. This second vehicle, another large one from what I could tell, crept up and stopped about the same distance behind me as the van was in front, boxing me in completely on this narrow shoulder. Its headlights were on high beam too, filling my car with light from both directions, making me feel like I was on a stage under spotlights. I grabbed my phone again, desperately trying to get any signal, even just 1 bar to make an emergency call, but still nothing. I was holding it up toward the window, moving it around trying to catch any possible signal, when I heard car doors opening, not slamming shut but opening from both vehicles at the same time. Through the blinding light I could barely make out shapes, 2 figures from the van in front and at least 1 from whatever was behind me, all moving slowly and deliberately, not rushing but not hesitating either. They were staying just outside the direct beams of their own headlights, keeping to the shadows at the edges, where I could only see silhouettes and suggestions of movement. One of them walked up to my passenger side window and just stood there, close enough that I could see they were wearing dark clothes, maybe jeans and a jacket, but their face was completely hidden in shadow above my window line. They didn't knock, didn't try the handle, just stood perfectly still like they were waiting for something. Another figure appeared at my driver's side, same distance away, same completely motionless stance, and I realized they were positioned so I couldn't open either door without hitting them. The third one, and now I could see there was definitely a 4th one too, circled around to the front and back of my car. I was completely surrounded, and they were all just standing there in absolute silence, not making any demands, not trying to communicate, just waiting. The only sound was the 2 engines idling, and my own ragged breathing that was fogging up the windows despite my efforts to control it. I had my phone ready to use as a weapon if needed, which sounds ridiculous now, but at the time it was literally the only thing I had besides my car keys. Then one of them, the one by my passenger window, lifted their hand and tapped on the glass with one knuckle. Just twice. Soft and almost polite. When I didn't respond, staying frozen in my seat with my fingers white-knuckled around my phone, they tapped again. Same pattern, same weird gentleness. The figure on my driver's side did the exact same thing at the exact same moment. 2 soft taps in perfect synchronization, like they had rehearsed it. That's when I knew this wasn't random. Wasn't just some group of criminals who happened upon a broken-down car. This was planned, coordinated, and they had probably done this before. My mind started racing through every option, ramming the van in front even with an overheating engine, trying to drive through the cornfield, screaming even though nobody would hear me, anything to break out of this trap. But before I could act on any of these desperate ideas, all 4 of them stepped back at the same time. Just one step, still maintaining their positions but giving me just enough space that I could theoretically open a door. The one in front raised their hand and made a rolling motion, like they were telling me to start my car and leave. I didn't need to be told twice and turned the key again, begging the universe to let my car start just this once, promising I'd never skip maintenance again, never ignore warning sounds, never drive alone at night through empty highways. The engine turned over once, twice, and then miraculously caught and held, running rough and making terrible sounds but actually running. The temperature gauge immediately shot to the red zone, but I shifted into drive anyway, ready to destroy the engine if it meant getting away from these people. But when I pressed the gas pedal, the car lurched forward maybe 3 feet and then died completely, all the dashboard lights going dark, even the hazard lights clicking off into nothing. The electrical system was completely dead, and this time I knew it wasn't coming back. The 2 vehicles that had trapped me suddenly killed their headlights too, plunging everything into absolute darkness. And for a moment I couldn't see anything at all, couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My phone screen was the only light source now, casting this weak blue glow inside my car, and I held it up trying to see what was happening outside. The 4 figures were gone, or at least I couldn't see them anymore. And for maybe 30 seconds nothing moved, nothing happened. Just me sitting in my dead car in pitch blackness on an empty highway. Then both vehicles started up again simultaneously, their engines roaring to life but still no lights. Oh. I heard them pulling away, one forward and one backward, their tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. And within seconds they were accelerating away in opposite directions, driving completely dark on the highway. I sat there shaking, unable to process what had just happened. Still expecting them to come back, still waiting for something horrible that never came. It took me another 10 minutes before I could make myself get out of the car and start walking, using my phone's flashlight to navigate the shoulder, constantly checking behind me every few steps. I walked for almost 2 hours before a state trooper found me, and when I told him what happened, he just nodded like he'd heard this before, and said there had been similar reports from that stretch of 169 over the past few months. They never found any evidence of who these people were, and the trooper told me I was lucky because 2 other drivers who'd broken down on that same stretch in the previous year hadn't been found for days, both of them discovered in their locked cars in various states of psychological trauma, unable or unwilling to explain what had happened to them during the missing time between their breakdown and when they were discovered. The investigators think it's some kind of group that targets vulnerable motorists, maybe doing it for intimidation, maybe for something worse that I was lucky enough to avoid by my car dying completely. I had to get therapy to deal with the nightmares, and even now, 2 years later, I can't drive at night anymore without having a panic attack. I take flights whenever possible, or I plan my routes to only drive during daylight hours with plenty of people around. What haunts me most isn't what happened, but what didn't happen, and what might have happened if my car hadn't died completely, or if I'd gotten out when they were standing around me. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there on that stretch of highway, waiting for the next broken down car, executing their strange ritual for reasons I'll never understand. The Peterbilt's engine had been making this weird rattling noise for the past 100 miles. Nothing serious, but enough to keep me on edge during that November 2023 haul. My 39-year-old body already felt like it belonged to someone twice my age. Too many years bouncing around in truck cabs, eating gas station food, sleeping in rest areas. I was moving agricultural equipment from Omaha to Denver, a route that usually took me about 10 hours if everything went smooth. Nancy had packed those beef sandwiches she always makes, the ones with the horseradish spread that burns just right, wrapped tight in aluminum foil. I kept thinking about getting home for my daughter Megan's basketball game on Saturday morning. She'd been practicing her free throws all month, and I'd promised to be there this time. The Nebraska rest stop near mile marker 287 sits about 40 miles west of Grand Island. One of those newer facilities built with federal funding that actually has decent lighting and those vending machines that never eat your dollar bills. I pulled in around 3 in the morning, needing to stretch my legs and grab some coffee to push through the last leg to Denver. The parking lot surprised me. At least 15 cars scattered across the regular vehicle section, way more than you'd expect at this hour. Sedans, SUVs, a couple of minivans, different colors and states on the license plates. Sometimes you hit these random clusters of travelers, maybe all avoiding some weather system or construction zone further up the highway. The truck parking area was nearly empty though, just me and 2 other rigs parked way at the far end, their running lights glowing orange in the darkness. I grabbed my jacket from behind the seat, one of those thick Carhartt ones with the quilted lining that Nancy bought me 2 Christmases ago, and headed toward the main building. The cold hit different that night, sharp and dry, the kind that makes your nose hairs freeze up instantly. As I walked past those parked cars, something started bothering me, like when you're trying to remember if you locked your front door but can't quite recall. Every single vehicle had frost on the windshields, that thin layer you get when cars sit for a while in cold weather. But underneath the frost, the glass looked foggy, like they'd all been running recently with people inside. The parking lot lights made everything look washed out and yellowish, creating these long shadows that stretched between the vehicles like dark fingers reaching across the asphalt. The automatic doors whooshed open, and I stepped into that artificial warmth that always smells like old coffee and industrial cleaner. The place was dead quiet, except for the electrical hum of the vending machines lined up against the far wall, their lights flickering slightly like they always do in these places. I headed straight for the men's room, my boots echoing on those polished concrete floors they put in all these rest stops now. The bathroom door was propped wide open with one of those yellow wet floor cones, but the floors were bone dry. Inside, all the faucets were dripping in this weird synchronized rhythm, like someone had turned them all on just enough to leak at the exact same rate. The mirrors had condensation on them, foggy patches right about face height, as if a bunch of people had been standing there breathing on the glass not too long ago. I did my business quick, that uneasy feeling crawling up my spine like cold fingers. When I went to wash my hands, the soap dispensers were all empty, every single one of them. But there were fresh soap suds still sliding down the sides of the sinks, pink foam from that cheap industrial soap they use. The paper towel dispensers had been pulled open, brown paper streaming down to the floor in long strips, like someone had yanked them out in a hurry. I dried my hands on my jeans and got out of there. Back in the main area, I noticed the information rack near the entrance. All those tourism brochures for local attractions and hotels had been emptied out, the pamphlets scattered across the floor in a trail leading toward the exit doors. But what really got me was the vending machines. Every single item had been selected. The metal coils all turned to their endpoints, but nothing had dropped down. Bags of chips, candy bars, bottles of soda, all hanging there at impossible angles, defying gravity. Something made me walk over to the windows facing the parking lot. Maybe just to confirm what my brain was already screaming at me to acknowledge. Those 15 cars sat there under the yellow lights, and now I could see inside them better. Every single driver's seat was pushed all the way back, like whoever had been driving was either really tall or had needed to get out in a hurry without taking time to adjust anything. The doors, I hadn't noticed it walking in, but now I could see. They were all slightly ajar, not wide open, just cracked maybe an inch or two, interior dome lights off despite the doors being open. That's when I saw the keys. Every single vehicle had its keys still in the ignition, glinting under the parking lot lights. Some of them had those heavy keychains people use, rabbit's feet and bottle openers and little photos in plastic frames, all just dangling there. My mouth went dry and I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears like a drum. I backed away from the window and started moving toward the exit, trying to look casual even though nobody was around to see me. The coffee could wait. Hell, everything could wait. I just needed to get back to my truck and get out of there. But as I pushed through those automatic doors, the cold air hit me along with something else. A smell like burning rubber mixed with something sweet. Almost like caramel, but wrong somehow. Synthetic. The parking lot seemed darker now, even though nothing had changed, and I could hear this low humming sound, barely audible, like 100 people humming the same note just below the range of normal hearing. My boots crunched on something as I walked. Broken pieces of cell phones, dozens of them, scattered across the asphalt like someone had taken a hammer to a phone store display. I picked up my pace, almost jogging now toward my Peterbilt, fumbling for my keys with numb fingers. The two other trucks I'd seen earlier were still there, but now I noticed their doors were open too. Cabs dark, no sign of the drivers. As I passed that cluster of abandoned cars, I could see more details that made my gut clench. Purses left on passenger seats, coffee cups still steaming in cup holders, a baby's car seat with the straps undone and hanging loose. One minivan had a DVD player still running in the back, some cartoon playing on repeat, the glow from the screen casting blue shadows through the frosted windows. The Nebraska license plates, Iowa, Colorado, Wyoming, all different places, but every single car had the same thing. A parking receipt from this rest stop tucked under the windshield wiper, all time stamped within the last hour. How the hell do 15 different groups of people all disappear within an hour? I reached my truck and grabbed the door handle, ready to climb up into safety, when I heard it, the distinct sound of car engines turning over, one after another, like dominoes falling. But nobody was starting them. I turned around slowly, my breath coming out in quick white puffs in the cold air, and watched as every single abandoned car in that parking lot came to life. Not roaring to life, just idling, that low purr of engines warming up. The headlights stayed off though, and the cars just sat there running in the dark like they were waiting for something. Then I noticed the steam starting to rise from their exhaust pipes, thick white clouds in the freezing air, but the smoke wasn't drifting away like it should. It was moving sideways, creeping along the ground toward my truck like morning fog. Except fog doesn't move with purpose, doesn't seem to reach for you. That's when the radios turned on. Every car radio, all at once, but not playing music or talk shows. It was voices, dozens of different voices all talking at the same time but not to each other, like recorded conversations played simultaneously. I could make out fragments as I stood there paralyzed. Someone ordering lunch, a woman singing happy birthday, a man arguing about a football game, a child asking to stop for the bathroom. Normal conversations, everyday stuff, but all cut up and overlapping in this horrible cacophony that made my teeth ache. The smell got stronger, that burnt rubber and fake sweet combination that made me want to gag. And underneath all those voices from the radios, I could hear something else. Breathing. Synchronized breathing. Like when you're in a quiet room and suddenly become aware of your own breath. Except this was coming from inside those empty cars, from seats that I could clearly see had nobody in them. My hands finally found the truck door handle, and I yanked myself up into the cab, slamming the door behind me hard enough to rattle the whole vehicle. My fingers fumbled with the keys, missing the ignition twice before finally getting them in. The Peterbilt roared to life, that familiar diesel rumble that usually comforted me now sounding too loud, too obvious. Through my windshield, I watched as every single headlight in that parking lot flicked on at the exact same moment. All of them pointed directly at my truck. Not just the front headlights, the brake lights, the reverse lights, the fog lights. Every possible light on those vehicles blazed to life, bathing my cab in this harsh, blinding white and red glow that made shadows dance across my dashboard like living things. The voices on the radios got louder, more frantic, overlapping into this wall of human sound that penetrated right through my closed windows. And then, just as I slammed the truck into gear, I saw them in my side mirrors, people standing behind each car, perfectly still, all facing my truck. But when I turned to look directly, nothing. Check the mirror again. They were there. Look back. Empty parking lot. I gunned it out of there, probably taking that exit turn faster than any 18-wheeler should. Tires screaming against the asphalt. In my rearview mirror, those lights followed me, not the cars, just the lights, staying at the exact same distance no matter how hard I pushed the accelerator. They stayed with me for maybe 5 miles down Interstate 80 before suddenly cutting out all at once, leaving me in complete darkness except for my own headlights cutting through the Nebraska night. I didn't stop driving until I hit Denver. Didn't even pull over to check that rattling sound in the engine that had gotten worse during my escape. When I finally got to the delivery point and told my dispatcher about what happened, he laughed and said, "I must have dozed off and had a nightmare. But I know what I saw. I know those people in the mirrors were real." And I know that 3 days later, when I looked up news for that area, there were reports of 17 vehicles found abandoned at that same rest stop, all with their engines running, keys in the ignition, and no sign of the drivers or passengers. The reports said it was probably human trafficking or some coordinated crime, but they never found anyone, never found any bodies, never found any explanation. I never took that route again. Told my dispatcher I'd quit before driving through Nebraska after dark, and I meant it. Nancy thinks I had some kind of breakdown, maybe a panic attack from too many hours on the road. And I let her believe that because it's easier than trying to explain what really happened. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night on any empty highway, I'll catch a glimpse of headlights in my mirror that seem to be following at the exact same distance for too long, and I have to pull over at the next truck stop, wait it out with other drivers around, pretending to check my logs or grab coffee until the feeling passes. I still drive for a living. Bills don't pay themselves. But I plan my routes different now, always making sure I'm near populated areas when 3 in the morning rolls around. And I never, ever stop at rest areas when there are too many cars, but no people. That's the thing that still keeps me up some nights, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle with missing pieces. Where did all those people go? What were those things I saw standing behind the cars that only existed in reflections? About a month ago, another trucker named Glenn told me something at a Flying J outside Denver that made my blood turn to ice water. He said his cousin drives that same stretch of Interstate 80, and one night around 3 in the morning, he saw a bunch of abandoned trucks at that same rest stop. Big rigs like mine, doors open, engines running, nobody around. But here's the thing that really got me. Glenn's cousin said he saw someone in his mirror walking between the trucks, checking each cab like they were looking for something specific. When he turned to look directly, the parking lot was empty. But in the mirror, clear as day, the figure kept searching, kept moving from truck to truck with this methodical patience that made him floor it out of there without looking back. We compared dates. It was exactly 1 month after my experience, down to the day. Glenn's cousin won't drive that route anymore either. Makes you wonder how many of us have seen things at that rest stop, how many have kept quiet because nobody would believe us anyway. All I know is that place isn't right, and whatever's happening there, it's still happening, still hunting, still collecting. My headlights caught her in that strange way where everything else disappears into darkness. She was standing on the shoulder of Route 47, both arms raised high above her head, waving in these big, sweeping motions like she was trying to flag down a plane instead of a car. The dashboard clock showed 3:17 a.m., and I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes since leaving the hospital parking garage, my scrub still smelling like disinfectant, and that weird metallic scent that clings to you after 12 hours in the respiratory unit. Being 29 means you think you're invincible, that nothing bad can happen to you, especially when you've dealt with life and death situations all night. But seeing this woman out there, completely alone on this stretch of highway that runs through nothing but abandoned warehouses and overgrown fields, made something in my chest tighten up. I remember gripping the steering wheel harder, my knuckles going white while I debated what to do. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to keep driving, to call 911 once I got further down the road. Let someone else deal with it. But she looked so desperate, and I kept thinking about my sister Katie, how she'd broken down on a similar road last year, and nobody stopped for 3 hours. The woman was wearing dark clothes, a navy blazer that looked expensive even from a distance, nice jeans, not the kind of outfit you'd expect from someone dangerous. Her blonde hair was shoulder length, neat despite the wind from passing semis, so I did what I probably shouldn't have done. I slowed down, checked my mirrors for any other cars lurking nearby, and pulled over about 50 feet ahead of her, keeping my engine running and my phone in my lap with 911 already dialed but not yet called. She jogged up to my passenger window, and I only rolled it down about 3 inches, just enough to hear her speak. Up close, she was maybe 45, with one of those faces that probably looked younger in better lighting. Her makeup was perfect though, which struck me as odd for someone stranded at 3 in the morning. No smeared mascara from crying, no signs of distress on her face at all. She smiled at me, this calm, almost serene expression that didn't match the frantic waving from moments before. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said, her voice steady and pleasant, like we were meeting at a coffee shop instead of on a dark highway. My car broke down about a mile back, and my phone died. I just need a ride to the next exit where I can call someone. Her explanation made sense, but something about her demeanor set off every alarm bell in my head. Still, I unlocked the door. God knows why. Maybe because turning away someone who looked so normal, so put together, felt cruel. She slid into the passenger seat with this fluid grace, closing the door gently behind her, and immediately the car filled with her perfume, something floral and heavy that reminded me of funeral homes. I pulled back onto the highway, accelerating slowly while trying to make conversation to ease my nerves. Asked her what happened to her car, and she said something vague about the engine making weird noises before it just stopped. Asked where she was headed before breaking down, and she said she was visiting family but didn't specify where. Every answer was like that, polite, reasonable on the surface, but completely empty of any real information. The next exit was only about 10 miles away, but those were going to be the longest 10 miles of my life. I kept glancing at her in my peripheral vision, and she just sat there, hands folded neatly in her lap, staring straight ahead through the windshield with that same subtle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. About 5 minutes into the drive, I reached over to adjust my rearview mirror because a semi was coming up behind us with its high beams on. That's when I noticed it. The side mirror on the passenger side showed the empty seat, just the beige fabric of my car's interior, the seatbelt hanging loose, nothing else. But she was right there. I could see her in my peripheral vision, could smell that overwhelming perfume, could hear her breathing in this measured, deliberate way. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the angle, maybe the darkness was playing tricks, maybe I was more exhausted than I thought. I adjusted the mirror slightly, tilted my head different ways, but no matter what I did, the reflection showed an empty seat. My heart started hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, this thick, wet pounding that made it hard to focus on the road. "Is everything all right?" she asked, and her voice sounded different now, lower, with this weird echo quality like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and forced myself to look straight ahead, told her everything was fine, just tired from my shift. She made this humming sound, not quite agreement, not quite anything really, just this low vibration that seemed to fill the entire car. The temperature dropped suddenly, or maybe that was just me going cold with fear, but I could see my breath coming out in little puffs even though it was August, and the AC wasn't even on that high. I started doing the math in my head. 5 more miles to the exit, maybe 6 minutes if I sped up a little. But when I pressed harder on the gas pedal, the speedometer didn't budge. We were still going exactly 55, no matter how hard I pressed down. That's when she started talking. Not to me exactly, but just talking in this monotone voice about the strangest things. "People leave pieces of themselves everywhere they go," she said, her head still facing forward, never turning to look at me. "In their cars, in their homes, in the places they work. Little fragments of who they are, what they've done, what they're going to do. Sometimes those pieces get picked up by others. Sometimes they get carried forward." I had no idea how to respond to that, so I just kept driving, watching the mile markers pass by with agonizing slowness. She continued, "You left something at the hospital tonight. Not equipment, not belongings, something else. And now you're carrying something that isn't yours." My mouth went completely dry. I wanted to ask her what she meant, wanted to scream at her to get out of my car, but my voice wouldn't work. It was like my throat had sealed itself shut. The exit sign finally came into view. Exit 42, with a gas station logo and a promise of food and lodging. Relief washed over me so intensely that I almost sobbed. I put on my turn signal, started to ease into the exit lane, and that's when she placed her hand on the dashboard. Not on my arm, not reaching for the wheel, just flat against the dashboard. Her hand was wrong. The fingers were too long, bent at angles that shouldn't have been possible, and the skin had this translucent quality where I could see dark veins pulsing underneath. "Not this exit," she said calmly. "The next one." But there was no next exit for another 15 miles. I knew this highway like the back of my hand, had driven it hundreds of times. My foot moved to the brake anyway, started to slow down for the exit, and she made this clicking sound with her tongue, sharp and disapproving like you'd make at a misbehaving dog. I jerked the wheel hard to the right, tires screaming as I veered into the exit lane despite her protests. The moment I did, she went completely silent. Not just quiet. It was like all sound in the car had been sucked out, creating this vacuum that made my ears pop painfully. I risked a glance at the passenger seat and found it empty. Completely, absolutely empty. The seatbelt was still buckled somehow, stretched across nothing, and that overwhelming perfume smell had vanished instantly. But the passenger door was hanging wide open, swinging back and forth even though we were moving at 40 miles an hour. The interior light was on, illuminating the seat, and there was something lying there. A phone. At first I thought she'd left her phone behind, but as I pulled into the gas station parking lot with shaking legs, I realized it looked exactly like mine. Same case, same cracked corner from when I dropped it last month. Same hospital parking sticker on the back. I slammed on the brakes under the bright canopy lights of the gas station, my real phone still in the cup holder where I'd left it. But this other phone, this duplicate, was lit up and active. The screen showed my GPS app tracking my exact location in real time, following the little blue dot that represented my car. The location history showed everywhere I'd been that night. The hospital, the route I'd taken, even the spot where I'd picked her up. But there were other locations too, places I'd never been, timestamps for the future, for later today, tomorrow, next week. Places called Riverside Memorial Gardens, Bennett Funeral Home, plots with numbers instead of names. My throat constricted as I picked up the phone with trembling fingers, and that's when I saw the last destination programmed into it, set for 4:47 a.m., just 20 minutes from now. It was my apartment address, but the label on it simply said, "Collection Point." I threw both phones onto the passenger floor and ran into the gas station, practically colliding with the glass doors in my panic. The teenager behind the counter looked up from his phone, startled by this woman in wrinkled scrubs bursting in like a maniac. I must have looked insane, trying to explain that someone had been in my car but wasn't really there, that she'd left a phone that was mine but wasn't mine. He just stared at me, suggested maybe I should call the police, which I did. 2 officers showed up about 10 minutes later. probably expecting to deal with a psychiatric case or someone high on something. They checked my car, found the duplicate phone right where I'd thrown it, and their expressions changed immediately. Turns out, they'd been getting similar reports all week. Women picking up other women on various highways around the state, always late at night, always with the same story about a broken-down car. The passengers would vanish, leaving behind these duplicate phones with disturbing GPS data. 3 of the women who'd reported it had died within days. Sudden brain aneurysms, unexplained organ failure, things that shouldn't happen to healthy people in their 20s and 30s. The officers took the duplicate phone as evidence and followed me home, insisted on checking my apartment before I went in. Everything looked normal, nothing out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. I called in sick for the next week, stayed with my sister Katie in another state, trying to make sense of what happened. The duplicate phone was never explained. The police said the GPS data was impossible, that the phone shouldn't have been able to predict future locations like that. They never found any woman matching the description I gave. No abandoned cars on that stretch of highway. 6 days later, I got a call from the police. Another woman had picked up the same passenger, or something that looked like her, on a completely different highway 3 states away. That woman didn't make it to the gas station. They found her car on the side of the road, engine still running, both doors open. 2 phones in the front seat showing the same impossible GPS data. She was in the driver's seat, unconscious but alive, and when she woke up in the hospital, she had no memory of the last 3 years of her life. Just gone, like they'd been deleted. I still work at the hospital, still drive home late at night, but I never stop for anyone anymore. And sometimes, when I'm checking my GPS, I see locations I've never been to flash across the screen for just a second before disappearing. Places I hope I'll never have to visit, at least not while I'm still breathing. "5 months ago, turning 36 had made me realize my life consisted of endless miles of asphalt and the hum of 18 wheels against pavement. Trucking paid the bills, kept me moving from state to state, hauling everything from furniture to frozen goods. That particular week in early May had me driving a load of electronics from Phoenix to Chicago, a route that usually took me through some pretty desolate stretches of highway. My marriage had fallen apart 6 months prior, and honestly, the solitude of the road felt like exactly what I needed. The cab of my Peterbilt had become more of a home than my actual apartment back in Tucson. That night, the one that still makes me check my mirrors more than necessary, started like any other long haul through the desert. The fuel gauge had been hovering near empty for the last 20 miles, and finding a station open at 2 in the morning on Highway 89 wasn't exactly easy. When the faded Shell sign finally appeared through the darkness, glowing like a beacon against the black desert sky, relief washed over me. The place looked ancient, one of those stations that probably hadn't been renovated since the 70s, with just 2 pumps and a small convenience store attached. No other vehicles sat in the lot, which wasn't unusual for that hour and location. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting an uneven glow across the cracked concrete. I pulled the rig in carefully, mindful of the tight space, and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the distant hum of the store's ancient air conditioning unit, struggling against the desert heat. I grabbed my wallet from the center console and climbed down from the cab, my joints protesting after 4 hours of straight driving. The desert air hit me immediately, still warm despite the early hour, carrying that distinctive smell of creosote and dust. My boots crunched against loose gravel as I walked to the pump, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. Through the store window, I could make out the silhouette of someone behind the counter, barely visible through the grime-covered glass. The pump itself looked older than me, one of those analog models where you could actually hear the fuel rushing through the hose. I started filling up, leaning against the truck while the numbers slowly climbed on the display. 40 gallons, 50, 60. Big rigs drink fuel like nothing else, and this would probably cost me close to $300. Inside the store, the clerk hadn't moved once since I'd arrived. Even from outside, I could tell something was wrong with his posture. The way he stood rigid behind that counter, his head slightly tilted like he was listening for something. The fluorescent light above him kept cutting out for split seconds, making him appear and disappear like frames missing from an old film reel. When the pump finally clicked off at 78 gallons, I hung up the nozzle and headed toward the door. The closer I got, the more details I could make out through the window. Young guy, maybe early 20s, wearing a faded red shell uniform that hung loose on his thin frame. His face was pale, almost gray under those harsh lights, and his eyes kept darting to the door, then back to the counter, then to the door again. The bell above the entrance gave a weak chime as I pushed inside, and the kid practically jumped out of his skin. "Just the diesel," I said, trying to keep my voice casual despite the weird vibe in the place. The store smelled like old coffee and something else, something metallic that reminded me of blood, but could have been rusty pipes. The kid nodded quickly, his fingers trembling as he punched numbers into the ancient register. His name tag read Aaron in faded letters, and up close I could see dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. Behind him, a security monitor showed grainy footage of the parking lot, but the screen kept jumping and distorting, making it impossible to see anything clearly. $312.47, Aaron whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes flicked to the door again, then to me, then back to the door. I handed him my credit card, and when our fingers brushed during the exchange, his skin felt ice cold despite the warmth of the night. While he ran the card, I noticed his other hand gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles had turned white. The receipt printer screeched to life, making him flinch violently. Every sound seemed to terrify him. The hum of the refrigerators, the buzz of the lights, even his own breathing, which came in short, shallow gasps. "You traveling alone?" he asked suddenly, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. Before I could answer, he leaned forward slightly, glancing toward the door again. "Don't matter, just, when you leave, drive fast. Don't stop for nothing." He pushed the receipt across the counter with shaking fingers. I was about to ask what he meant when he grabbed my wrist. His grip was desperate, urgent. "And don't open that door again," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Once you're out, just go, please." The intensity in his eyes made my chest tighten. This wasn't some joke or local trying to mess with an outsider. I pulled my hand back, pocketed the receipt, and headed for the door without another word. Whatever was happening here, the kid's fear was real enough to make me want to get back on the road immediately. The bell chimed again as I pushed outside, and I heard Aaron let out a sound behind me, something between a whimper and a prayer. The walk back to my truck felt longer than before, the darkness beyond the station's lights seeming to press in from all sides. I climbed up into the cab quickly, locked the doors, and started the engine. The diesel rumbled to life, a comforting sound after the strangeness inside that store. I was just putting the truck in gear when I heard it. A soft knocking on the glass of the passenger door. 3 deliberate taps, patient and measured. My head snapped toward the sound, but the parking lot lights didn't reach that side of the cab. All I could see in the window was blackness. Then a voice, clear despite the running engine, came from outside the passenger door. "Come on, Richard, open up. We need to talk." My entire body went rigid. Richard. That voice had just said my name. My actual name that I hadn't told anyone at this stop, that wasn't on any paperwork visible in the cab, that the kid inside definitely hadn't used. The credit card I'd paid with was a company card under the trucking firm's name, not mine. My CDL was tucked away in my wallet. There was absolutely no way anyone here could know my name. The knock came again, still gentle, almost friendly. "Richard, I know you can hear me. Just crack the window, 5 minutes, that's all I need." The voice sounded normal, masculine, maybe middle-aged, with no accent I could place. But there was something underneath the words, something that made every instinct scream at me not to look, not to respond, just drive. I slammed the truck into first gear and started rolling forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the side mirror, I caught a glimpse of movement. A figure stepping back from the truck, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dark suit. Who wears a suit in the middle of the desert at 2 in the morning? The figure didn't chase after the truck, just stood there watching as I pulled away. "Richard, you're making this harder than it needs to be," the voice called out, somehow still audible over the diesel engine. "I'll be seeing you at the next stop, mile marker 277. You know you have to stop there." My throat went dry. Mile marker 277 was the way station, mandatory for all commercial vehicles. If I skipped it, I'd have Dati on my ass within hours, probably lose my CDL. But how did this person know my route? How did they know I'd have to stop there? I hit the highway doing 70, way over the limit for a loaded rig, but I didn't care. In the rearview mirror, the gas station lights faded into the distance, swallowed by the desert darkness. My phone, mounted on the dashboard, showed 2:23 a.m. The way station was maybe 40 miles ahead, less than an hour at this speed. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see headlights following, but the road remained empty. Just me, the yellow lines, and miles of nothing. Then I noticed something that made my grip tighten on the wheel. The GPS on my phone was showing my name at the top of the screen, Richard's route, something I'd never programmed, never seen before. I reached over to check the settings, and that's when I saw the recent search history wasn't mine. Addresses I'd never looked up. My ex-wife's new apartment in Flagstaff, my mother's nursing home in Albuquerque, my daughter's college dorm at ASU. Places this person, whoever they were, wanted me to know they knew about. The mile markers counted down like a timer on a bomb. 251, 250, 249, each one bringing me closer to that way station where he said he'd be waiting. I tried calling 911, but my phone showed no service despite having full bars just minutes before. The radio in the truck produced only static, no matter which channel I tried. Even the CB, usually full of late-night chatter from other truckers, was dead silent. It felt like I was driving through a bubble, cut off from the rest of the world. At mile marker 265, I made a decision. There was a truck stop at exit 38, a big flying J that would have people, witnesses, maybe even security. I could park there, wait until daylight, figure out what to do. But as I approached the exit, my foot wouldn't move to the brake pedal. I pressed down hard, but nothing happened. The pedal felt normal, had resistance, but the truck kept maintaining exactly 70 miles per hour. The steering wheel turned freely. I could change lanes, but I couldn't slow down, couldn't take the exit. Panic started creeping up my spine as I watched the flying J pass by in a blur of lights. Whatever was happening, whoever this person was, they had control of my truck somehow. The electronics, the brakes, probably the accelerator too. Modern trucks are all computer-controlled, and someone with the right knowledge could hack into the systems. But doing it while the truck was moving, from a distance? That was something else entirely. Mile marker 277 appeared in my headlights like a tombstone. The way station sat just ahead, its inspection lanes empty, the office building dark except for a single light in the front window. As my truck began to slow on its own, finally responding to my desperate pumping of the brakes, I saw him. The same tall figure in the dark suit standing next to a black sedan parked beside the scale house. He raised one hand in a casual wave, like we were old friends meeting for coffee. My truck rolled to a stop exactly where it needed to for the weigh-in, and the engine died without me turning the key. The man walked toward my truck with measured steps, his face becoming clearer under the overhead lights. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, unremarkable features except for his eyes. They were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost white. He stopped at my door and knocked 3 times, the same patient rhythm from before. "Richard, please step out of the vehicle. We have business to discuss regarding your cargo." My cargo? I was hauling electronics, nothing special, just TVs and computers for a Best Buy distribution center. Through the side mirror, I watched him pull out what looked like a small tablet, its screen glowing green in the darkness. "Your manifest says electronics," he continued, his voice carrying perfectly through the closed door. "But we both know there's an extra package in there. Serial number X74429. You weren't supposed to know about it, but plans have changed." I had no idea what he was talking about, but something in his tone made me check the sleeper compartment behind my seat. There, wedged between my duffel bag and the back wall, was a metal briefcase I'd never seen before, secured with electronic locks, a small red light blinking steadily on its surface. The man must have seen my expression change because he smiled, a thin stretching of lips that didn't reach those pale eyes. "Previous driver put it there yesterday when you stopped in Phoenix. You've been carrying it for 300 miles without knowing. Now you have two choices. Give me the case and drive away, forget this ever happened, go back to your life. Or refuse, and, well..." He pulled out a phone, showed me the screen. Security camera footage of my daughter walking into her dorm room, time-stamped from 3 hours ago. "Rebecca's studying for her chemistry midterm right now. Room 314, Preston Hall. She keeps her window cracked because the heater runs too hot." My blood turned to ice. The decision wasn't really a choice at all. With shaking fingers, I reached back, grabbed the briefcase, and climbed down from the cab. The moment my feet hit the pavement, my truck's engine roared back to life on its own, the doors locking automatically. I handed him the case, and he examined it briefly, checking the seals, verifying something on his tablet. "Smart man," he said, already walking back to his sedan. "Your truck will start working normally once I'm gone. And Richard, don't stop at any more gas stations tonight. Take Interstate 40 straight through to Amarillo. Aaron at the Shell station. He won't make it through his shift if you go back." The sedan pulled away, disappearing into the desert darkness, and true to his word, my truck returned to normal. I drove straight through to Chicago, delivered my legitimate cargo, and never said a word about what happened. But I did check the news 3 days later. A young gas station clerk named Aaron Vasquez was found dead at a Shell station on Highway 89. Apparent heart attack, even though he was only 23 years old. That was 5 months ago, and I've since changed routes, only driving daylight hours now. Sometimes I wonder what was in that case, who that man really was, but mostly I'm just grateful my daughter is safe, still calling me every Sunday, still complaining about her dorm room being too hot. The CB radio in my Ford pickup hadn't picked up another driver for hours, just static echoing through Copper Canyon's winding roads. Sandra had called me 2 days earlier about clearing out the rest of my stuff from her place in Utah. Apparently her new boyfriend needed the garage space. Fine by me. I'd been making these furniture runs every few months since the divorce papers were signed, and this Monday night in March was just another trip with another loaded trailer swaying behind my truck. The canyon walls rose up on both sides, ancient rock formations that blocked out most of the sky, except for a narrow strip where clouds covered any trace of moonlight. My supervisor at the warehouse had given me until Wednesday to get back, which meant I could take the old canyon route instead of dealing with the interstate construction zones. 14 hours into the drive, running on nothing but gas station coffee, and whatever energy drinks I could find, I kept checking my mirrors to make sure the trailer stayed centered on these sharp curves. A woman's voice suddenly cut through the static on Channel 19, each word coming through clear despite the interference around the edges. "Hello, can anyone hear me? There's been an accident. We need help. Please, if anyone can hear this, we're just off mile marker 17, about 50 feet down the embankment on the north side. My husband's unconscious and I think his leg is broken. The car rolled twice before it stopped. Please, somebody help us." Something about her tone made my skin prickle. She sounded like she was ordering takeout, not reporting that her car had just tumbled down a mountainside. The calmness in her voice, the way she rattled off those specific details without any panic or tears, it all felt rehearsed somehow. But 40 miles from the nearest town, with these canyon walls blocking any cell signal, you couldn't just drive past someone asking for help. I grabbed the handset while navigating another hairpin turn, knowing mile marker 17 was maybe 3 miles ahead based on the last sign I'd noticed. Against every warning bell going off in my head, I pressed the talk button. "This is eastbound traffic on 19. I hear you loud and clear. I'm about 3 miles out from marker 17. Hang tight, I'm coming to help. Can you tell me what color your car is? Any injuries besides your husband?" My voice echoed back through the speaker for a second before she responded, and when she did, there was this weird delay, like she was thinking about each word before saying it. "Thank you so much for responding. It's a silver sedan, a newer model Toyota. The front end is completely smashed in. I'm okay, just some cuts and bruises, but my husband, he won't wake up. There's blood coming from his head, and his left leg is bent at an angle that doesn't look right. Please hurry." The transmission cut out with a sharp click, and I pushed harder on the accelerator, making the trailer lurch dangerously on the next curve. Something kept nagging at me, though. She never said her name, never mentioned trying to flag down other cars, never asked me to call for an ambulance once I got to somewhere with cell service. Mile marker 16 flew past my window, and I started scanning the shoulder for any sign of an accident scene, my high beams cutting through the darkness ahead. When 17 finally appeared in my headlights, I pulled over as far as I could without risking the trailer sliding off the narrow shoulder, grabbed my flashlight from under the seat, and stepped out into the cold mountain air. The silence hit me immediately. No sound of settling metal, no hiss of a damaged radiator. Nothing but the tick of my own engine cooling and the wind whistling through the canyon. I walked along the guardrail, sweeping my flashlight beam down the embankment on the north side, and that's when I saw them. Fresh tire marks on the asphalt, leading straight toward the edge. The guardrail had a decent-sized dent in it, with white paint transfer that looked recent, and when I leaned over to look down, I could see broken glass scattered across the rocks about 20 feet below. But beyond that, nothing. A silver Toyota, no injured passengers, just empty darkness stretching down into the canyon. I spent the next 20 minutes climbing down that embankment, using my flashlight to check every possible spot where a car could have landed. The broken glass formed a trail that led about 50 feet down, exactly where she'd said, but then it just stopped. No skid marks in the dirt, no crushed bushes, no oil stains on the rocks, nothing to indicate a 2-ton vehicle had rolled through here. My boots kept slipping on the loose gravel, and twice I had to grab onto the scraggly pine trees growing out of the cliff face to keep from tumbling down myself. The whole time, I kept thinking about how specific her description had been, how she knew exactly how far down they'd gone. When I finally climbed back up to the road, winded and covered in dirt, I found another driver had stopped behind my truck, an older guy in a Peterbilt who'd seen my hazard lights. "Everything all right, buddy?" he called out, walking toward me with his own flashlight. "Saw your rig parked here and thought you might have trouble with that trailer." I explained about the CB call, the woman asking for help, and he got this look on his face that made my stomach tighten. "Silver Toyota, you said? Young woman, calm voice, husband with a broken leg?" The way he repeated those details, I knew he'd heard the same broadcast. "Got that call about an hour ago when I was heading westbound. Came through clear as day on 19. Thing is, I was talking to my dispatcher right after on a different channel, and he said 3 other drivers had reported the same call tonight, all at different times. Each one stopped to look, and each one found exactly what you found. Evidence of a crash, but no car." He pointed at the tire marks with his light, then at the damaged guardrail. "These marks were here when I passed through this afternoon before sunset. Whatever happened here, it wasn't tonight. We were both standing there trying to make sense of it when the CB radio in my truck crackled to life again. The woman's voice came through the open window, but this time it was different. Quieter, more intimate, like she was speaking directly into the microphone. "Thank you for stopping, but you're too late. We've been down here for so long, waiting in the cold. The metal is twisted around us like fingers, and the engine block is pressing against his chest. Can you hear him breathing? Listen carefully." Then came this wet, ragged sound that made both of us step back from the truck. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, irregular and labored before cutting to dead air. The trucker grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in through my jacket. That ain't coming from no accident scene, friend. I've pulled people from wrecks before and nobody pinned under an engine block sounds like that. We need to get out of here. But then she spoke again, and this time she said something that made every hair on my body stand straight up. Jerome, I know you're listening. You can't leave us again, Jerome. Not like you did in Utah. Sandra tried to warn you about taking this route, didn't she? She knew what happened here. Check your glove box, Jerome. Check what she packed for you. My legs nearly gave out when I heard my name. Not my handle, not eastbound driver, but my actual name. The trucker was already backing toward his rig, shaking his head and muttering something about not getting paid enough for this. But I couldn't move. Nobody on this road knew my name. I hadn't given it over the radio, hadn't stopped anywhere since crossing the state line. And Sandra, she'd insisted I take some of my old things from the garage, practically forced a box of junk on me that I'd tossed in the passenger seat without looking. My hands trembled as I reached for the truck door, the sound of the Peterbilt's engine roaring to life behind me as the other driver took off without another word. Inside the cab, the dome light seemed too dim, casting shadows that moved wrong across the dashboard. The glove box latch felt cold under my fingers, and when I opened it, a manila envelope fell out onto the floor, one I'd never seen before. Sandra's handwriting was on the front. Jerome, you need to know the truth about Copper Canyon. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle, dated from 6 years ago. The headline on the first one read, "Couple missing after canyon crash," with a photo that knocked the breath out of me. It was me, but younger, standing next to a woman I'd never seen before beside a silver Toyota. The article said Jerome Hutchinson and his wife Valerie had disappeared after their car went off the road at mile marker 17. Their bodies never recovered. But that was impossible. 6 years ago, I was living in Colorado, working construction, had never even been to this canyon before meeting Sandra. I grabbed the next clipping with numb fingers. Search called off for missing couple. And there was another photo, this one from a security camera at a gas station. Clear as day, it showed me filling up that same silver Toyota, the timestamp reading 3 days before the accident. The woman from the photo, Valerie, was visible through the passenger window. More clippings, more evidence of a life I'd never lived, a marriage I'd never had, a death that hadn't happened. The last item in the envelope was a note in Sandra's writing. I found these in your things when we met. You said you didn't remember, that sometimes whole chunks of your past just weren't there. I should have told you sooner, but I was scared. Don't go through that canyon, Jerome. She's still waiting for you there. The CB crackled again, and this time the voice was barely a whisper, close and personal, like lips pressed against the microphone. Jerome, stop reading those lies. You know who I am. You remember the way my hair smelled like vanilla, the scar on my palm from when I tried to cook you dinner on our anniversary. You remember the song that was playing when we crashed, our song. Turn the radio to FM 93.5. It's playing right now. My finger moved toward the radio dial without conscious thought, like muscle memory taking over, and I had to physically grab my wrist with my other hand to stop myself. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, that I needed to drive away now, but my hand kept reaching for that dial. When I finally switched it over, static filled the cab for a moment, before a song faded in, Wonderwall by Oasis. The moment those opening chords hit, something cracked inside my skull like ice breaking on a frozen lake, and memories that weren't supposed to exist came flooding through. Valerie laughing in the passenger seat, singing off-key. The argument about her sister, the deer that jumped in front of us, the way the guardrail bent like paper when we hit it, her screaming my name as we went over. The silence after the rolling stopped. But underneath those memories were my other life, meeting Sandra 2 years ago at a bar in Albuquerque, our wedding, the divorce, the warehouse job. 2 complete histories existing in one mind, and I couldn't tell which one was real anymore. The woman on the CB spoke one more time. "I'm still in the car, Jerome. I never left. You did. You crawled out and walked away, and you forgot about me. But every time you drive through here, I try to bring you back. Come down to the car, come back to me. We can leave together this time." I looked down at my hands and saw blood under my fingernails that hadn't been there before, old and dried and flaking off. The newspaper clippings were dissolving in my lap, the ink running like water, forming new words. "You left her to die. You left her to die. You left her to die." I slammed the truck into gear and floored it, the trailer fishtailing wildly as I tore away from mile marker 17. The CB radio kept crackling with her voice, pleading, crying, then angry and screaming my name. But I reached over and ripped the power cord out of the dashboard. The silence that followed was almost worse. In my rearview mirror, I swear I could see headlights rising up from the embankment. Impossible headlights from a car that couldn't exist, following me through every curve. I drove for 3 straight hours without stopping, pushing that old Ford harder than I ever had, until I finally saw the lights of a 24-hour diner near the state line. I pulled in, parked under the brightest light I could find, and sat there until dawn, going through my wallet, my phone, looking for any proof of who I really was. Every photo of Sandra and me was real. My driver's license was real. The divorce papers were real. But so were the scars on my ribs that I'd never noticed before, the ones that looked like they came from a steering wheel impact. I made it home to New Mexico that morning and immediately went to the courthouse to pull public records. Jerome Hutchinson, my name, my social security number, had no death certificate, no missing person report, no record of ever being married to anyone named Valerie. But I found something else in the newspaper archives from 6 years ago. A small article about an unidentified woman's body found in a ravine near Copper Canyon, discovered by hikers months after an apparent car accident. Silver Toyota, partial plate matching what would have been mine if I'd lived in Utah then. She was wearing a wedding ring, but they never found out who she was. The article mentioned that investigators believed there might have been a passenger who walked away from the crash, based on blood evidence found leading up to the road. They never found him. I've never driven through Copper Canyon again, and I won't. I traded in my truck, got rid of the CB radio, moved to a different apartment. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear static that sounds like someone trying to speak. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see dried blood under my fingernails that takes forever to wash away. The night had bled into early morning by the time I clocked out from the hospital. My brain was foggy from 12 straight hours of trauma cases, and the only thing I could think about was coffee and a warm shower. The city was still asleep when I started driving home, and for the first few miles, everything felt routine. Then my GPS screen blinked, froze, and restarted with that soft chime I'd heard 1,000 times before. Only this time, it never came back online. I figured I knew the way well enough, but somewhere after the second intersection, I must have turned onto the wrong road. It did not look like any road I had taken before. The asphalt gave way to cracked pavement and then to gravel, flanked by tall weeds that brushed the sides of my car. The sky had started to pale, but there was no hint of dawn warmth, just that dull bluish light that makes everything look abandoned. The radio was dead too. Nothing but static. I kept telling myself it was fine, that I'd hit the highway again soon. But after 20 minutes of driving past nameless turns and sagging mailboxes, I realized I hadn't seen another car at all. When the gas light blinked on, I finally spotted a small gas station just ahead, a single row of pumps, a flickering sign, and a convenience store with the metal shutters halfway down. The lot was empty. I pulled in anyway, parked near the pumps, and stepped out to stretch my legs. The air was colder than I expected, the kind of damp chill that clings to you even through your scrubs. I tried opening my phone's map again, but it showed me floating in a gray void, no roads, no landmarks. That's when I noticed the houses behind the station. They were lined along the opposite side of the road, maybe half a dozen of them, all spaced far apart. Every single one had its lights on, porch lamps, living room windows, even bedrooms glowing behind drawn curtains. And every front door I could see stood wide open. At first, I thought it was some kind of small-town quirk, maybe early risers or night shift workers like me. But there was no sound, no cars, no dogs, no movement at all. The air felt too still, like the world had paused mid-breath. I stood there for a long minute just staring at those houses. My first instinct was to call out to see if anyone answered back, but something inside me told me not to. I decided to get back into the car and keep driving, figuring the main road had to connect somewhere up ahead. As I pulled out, I glanced again toward the houses, and that was when I realized the street stretched farther than I'd thought. There were more houses beyond the curve, and all of them looked the same. Lights burning, doors hanging open, and absolute silence. The further I went, the worse it got. Every mailbox was empty, no cars in the driveways, not even trash bins by the curb. I started feeling this odd pressure in my chest, like the air itself was heavier the deeper I went into that place. My phone still had no signal, but I could see the battery draining faster than usual. I rolled the window down halfway, hoping to hear some hint of life. Insects, wind, anything. But all I caught was the low hum of my engine echoing between the houses. Eventually, I slowed the car down near an intersection where the road split in 3 directions. On the corner stood a small white house with peeling paint and a swing set in the yard. The swing was moving slightly, not fast, just that slow, steady sway that doesn't stop even when the air is still. I stared at it long enough to notice that the chain made no sound. I thought maybe it was the wind playing tricks, but there was no breeze. I put the car in park again, against my better judgment, and stepped out just to see if someone might be inside. The closer I got to that house, the more wrong everything looked. The porch light flickered faintly, and inside, through the open door, I could see the television playing static. A cereal bowl sat on the counter, milk still in it, spoon resting on the edge. It was like someone had just walked away mid-breakfast. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone home?" And the sound of my own voice made me flinch. It came out too loud, too real, like it didn't belong there. No answer came, but the swing behind me had stopped moving. I stepped inside just far enough to see the living room. The carpet was clean but damp, like it had absorbed humidity for weeks. A clock on the wall ticked quietly, yet every second felt drawn out, delayed. I remember thinking that the air smelled faintly like metal, and that detail stuck with me more than anything else. I called out again, softer this time, but my voice didn't carry far. There were family photos on the wall. 2 kids, a man in work clothes, a woman with dark hair, but all of the frames faced slightly downward, as if someone had adjusted them that way on purpose. A noise came from deeper inside the house, something light, like a foot dragging over linoleum. I froze in the doorway and listened. It happened again, slower, almost deliberate. My first thought was that someone needed help, but then I noticed the hallway lights turning off one by one, from the far end toward me. Each bulb dimmed with a faint pop, until only the living room lamp remained. My pulse hammered in my ears. I took a slow step backward toward the porch, trying not to make a sound, and that was when I saw movement in the reflection of the television screen. It wasn't clear enough to make out a person, more like a shape standing halfway down the hall. It didn't move toward me. It just stood there, outlined by the last flicker of light before the living room lamp blinked out completely. I stumbled outside, nearly tripping over the porch steps, and ran to my car without daring to look back at the door. When I slammed the door shut, the automatic headlights illuminated the front of the house. The porch light had gone dark, but in every other house up the street, the lights were still burning bright. I drove off fast enough to send gravel flying. The road twisted for miles, but every few turns I'd glimpse another cluster of houses, each one with that same eerie pattern. Lights on, doors wide open, no one in sight. I kept expecting to see a police car, a roadblock, something that would explain it, but the road only stretched farther into black fields. When my gas light started blinking again, I nearly panicked, thinking I'd never find my way back. Then out of nowhere, I saw the glow of a highway sign ahead. The sign didn't name a place I recognized, but the sight of it was enough to make me pull over and breathe for a second. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel, and my throat felt raw. Behind me, the road stretched into total darkness. No headlights, no glow from those houses. I turned my car around to check just to see if they were still there, but the moment I faced that direction again, the road was empty. It was like that whole stretch of town had folded in on itself. When I reached the highway, traffic had returned. Trucks, headlights, the hum of normal life. I took the next exit with an open diner and stumbled inside, still in my scrubs, smelling like antiseptic and fear. The waitress gave me a worried look and asked if I was okay. I told her I'd taken a wrong turn near the gas station a few miles back, but she frowned and said there hadn't been a gas station out that way in years. She even called over a man sitting at the counter, some local driver, who confirmed it used to exist but burned down sometime in the early 2000s. I thought maybe I'd just mixed things up. Maybe the exhaustion had finally caught up to me. But when I walked back to my car after finishing my coffee, there was a layer of fine gray dust coating the hood, like ash. I touched it with my fingertips, and it smeared dark, greasy, like soot. My shoes left faint prints of it on the floor mat when I drove home. I cleaned the car the next day, but I swear the smell lingered, faint, metallic, like the air inside that empty house. I have never found that road again, no matter how many times I tried tracing my route. I even showed the area on the map to a coworker once, and she said it looked like farmland, nothing else. Still, sometimes when I drive home after night shifts, I catch a glimpse of porch lights glowing far off past the tree line. Small, steady dots in the dark. And every single time I make sure to stay on the highway.